minutes of the August 28th, 2023 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Mendez, seconded by Alder Field. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no raised hands, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand otherwise. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes unanimously. Next is the schedule of meetings. We have regular meetings on October 2nd and 30th and November 13th and 27th. All of those are regular virtual meetings at 5:30 p.m. And we have a special meeting scheduled for Thursday, December 7th at 5 p.m., which will be in person. All right, next up is the consent agenda. It has been the custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items where staff believes an application has been sufficiently reviewed to support approval with all of the conditions in the staff report, and when the applicant accepts those conditions and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition. The items proposed for the consent agenda tonight are Agenda Item 2, Legistar Item 79381, authorizing the execution of a release of a reservation for a future street as granted over Lot 2 of CSM number 555, now in the city of Fitchburg, adjacent to City of Madison, District 14. And we have agenda items 4 through 6. Item 4, Legistar number 77207, creating section 28.022-00626 of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of various properties located in the northeastern quadrant of the Acacia Ridge subdivision, generally addressed as 606 to 614 Little Dove Trail and 9205 to 9229 Silver Maple Drive, First Alder District, from TRC 3, Traditional Residential Consistent 3, to TRP, Traditional Residential Planned District. Item 5, Legistar Item 77375, 606 to 614 Little Dove Trail, 9205 to 9229 Silver Maple Drive, and 9206 to 9242 Gentle Feather Road, and various other parcels in the Acacia Ridge subdivision, First Alder District. Approval of an alteration to an approved transitional residential planned district master plan for the Acacia Ridge subdivision to reflect the proposed Acacia Ridge replat number 5 subdivision. Agenda Item 6, Legistar 76590, approving the preliminary plat and final plat of Acacia Ridge replat number 5 on property generally addressed as 606 to 614 Little Dove Trail, 9205 to 9229 Silver Maple Drive, 9206 to 9242 Gentle Feather Road, First Alder District. Then we have Agenda Item 14, Legistar 79321, 339 West Gorham Street, District 4, consideration of a conditional use in an approved PD SIP for a nightclub on the first floor of a mixed-use building. Agenda Item 15, Legistar 79322, 1108 Post Road, District 14, consideration of a conditional use in the Industrial General District for an arts, technical, or trade school to allow dog training. Agenda Item 16, Legistar 79323, 2417 Horde Street, District 12, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. Agenda Item 17, Legistar 79324, 617 Knickerbocker Street, District 13, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. And then we have a referral for Agenda Item 18, 79325 to be referred to the October 2nd meeting at the request of the applicant. That is 6302 Odana Road, District 19, consideration of a conditional use in the SE district for a hotel to allow an office building to be converted into a hotel with 15 rooms or suites. Of these items proposed for the consent agenda and that referral, are there any requests for separation? Seeing no raised hand, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda and the one referral item? Moved by Commissioner Mendez. Seconded by Commissioner Shepard. I will open the public hearing and close the public hearing, and we'll move to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Alder Wahaley.
Yeah, is the item for District 7 excluded for the Maple Grove, the Ryan Funeral Home?
That is excluded from the consent agenda. That will be on the discussion tonight. Thank you.
And which item number is it?
That is agenda item 19.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 3, Legistar number 79226, creating a housing task force addressing Madison's affordable housing shortage and other related housing issues. I believe we have Matt Wachter here to run this through this item.
So I'll just be really brief. We have a full agenda tonight. I just wanted to quickly run through the memo that was attached. After this resolution was introduced, I had probably half or more of the council reach out to really ask questions about what are the housing initiatives that we already have, what are we working on through committees, and alternative ideas for what a task force or sort of research project could look like. So I'll just quickly touch on some of the highlights of the memo, and then I'm available to answer questions. Just quickly share my screen here. So one of the first questions was, where do we talk about housing right now? And because this is a big issue, it ends up getting talked about in a variety of committees. So really, on an annual basis, the Housing Strategy Committee is digging through data, sort of what's happening now, and also they write and review reports related to policy initiatives, and that's staffed by Community Development and Planning Division staff that. Then really the other committees are tasked with the implementation of a lot of the strategies and initiatives that come out of Housing Strategy Committee. So funding, if it's federal funds, it goes through CDBG. If it's things like TIF or land banking, it tends to go through the Finance Committee. When we do projects, we have the Community Development Authority that actually goes and builds things, but also the Finance Committee ends up working on large projects like the State Street ramp. We're disposing of city property to help create housing. So again, multiple committees touch on this issue, just depending on the nature of the housing project. You and other more regulatory bodies look at the plans, the rules, and that whole framework for how we actually move housing proposals through the city process. The CDA actually owns and manages over 1,000 units of housing. And then we have the Tenant and Landlord Committee, which digs into issues related to that relationship. This is not to mention committees staffed by Department of Civil Rights that focus on other aspects of housing. So again, lots of different committees are looking at this, and items oftentimes cross multiple committees here. One of the things that we do is we write a lot of reports. A number of them come through Plan Commission. So these reports in red are these major documents that really dig into data about what's happening in housing. And then they oftentimes look at national best practices and make firm policy recommendations. The analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and consolidated plan are required by the federal government that we produce these reports usually on about a 5-year rolling basis. The other reports tend to be they're requested by council. They're things that we choose to do. And then what we did is in 2021, staff went through and read all of the reports written in the last 10 years, every recommendation in there, and categorized them and moved them into a work plan called Housing Forward that really set the stage for us doing things like the raft of zoning changes that came through a year or two ago to up the threshold for conditional use. It directed new funding initiatives. It led to work on building new homeless shelters. So Housing Forward is the work plan that we've been working on since 2021. And so looking forward, things that the staff were already planning doing in 2023, 2024. We have a whole host of development projects, which are listed in the appendix to this. But Housing Strategy Committee is just wrapping up their housing snapshot, which covers housing data. And then from that data, they were planning to update the Housing Forward work plan to make sure that what we're doing matches the problems identified in the snapshot. And then this is that 5-year moment where we have to update the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which really looks at housing through the lens mostly of race to identify barriers in the housing market. And then the 5-year consolidated plan, HUD makes us look at all the data of what are the challenges in our market and set funding goals and sort of tell HUD how are you going to spend your federal dollars to address those housing challenges. Then we have a number of policy and research projects that different departments are planning to work on. This is largely based on requests from the mayor and council over the last year. So I'll just jump ahead there. And then, like I mentioned before, about half the council has called staff over the last month to talk about housing. And from all of those conversations, it's clear that there's a desire to have really two conversations going forward. One is to build a better shared understanding of what is really in that housing data and make sure everyone understands what we're currently doing to address housing, as well as look at those future challenges and where should we be doing more. This is really more of a conversation and staff answering questions of council, especially new alders who haven't been, working on these housing issues through the city in recent years. And then almost universally, alders had desire to answer these 3 questions to really drive more work. One is about ownership. The next is how can we go from building roughly 400 units of rental housing a year to something dramatically more to meet our housing needs? And then the issue of what can we do about student housing, particularly affordable student housing? These came up in almost every conversation, and these are items that are called out in the original resolution by Alder Burris, as well as a number of other questions. But these were the sort of the themes that it felt like they had universal support when I had these calls. So the memo has a giant appendix that also lists all the things that we have been working on over the last decade or so that again we can have a kind of a shared understanding of where we're at today. So really briefly, that's sort of what that memo is supposed to cover, and I'm here to answer questions if anyone has any.
Thanks so much, Matt. I guess we'll open it up for public comment. Heather, I see Alder Burris register. Are there any other members of the public we should announce?
At this point.
Okay. Is Alder Burris, sorry, scrolling through, available and would like to speak?
Sure. Yeah, since I introduced the resolution, I guess I just wanted to talk about why I did it. So I think the easiest way to talk about it is what this is not. It is not that some of us don't understand housing in a crisis. Myself, I was an owner and a renter and worked at a management company and worked in development. It's not about me. It's not another study, another duplication of effort that staff is incredible with. I just have report after report. If you see my desk here, you'd see I have a bunch of reports and things all lined up. It's not about interfering or not transparency or not superseding what has already done, and it's not even about the Wisconsin State statute, what we can and we can't do. It is about just bringing all different factors, not only within the city of Madison, and I guess that's my question for Matt, is have these different segments ever come together and just had an open and free discussion about housing in the future, because there's so many things that add into that. It is, I don't think the snapshot or the housing report is all inclusive. I don't think that Matt would disagree with me that it's all inclusive. It's a final say on anything. And when I read Matt's work, I read it in detail. I went through and I guess you can't see it, but I have pages upon pages. I went line by line, word by word, because it's so important. I think what I got out of it is that where we've been over the past, amount of years, and where we would like to go. The in-between is how do we work all of that out, and in consideration of all the different groups that are involved in housing, from us as a city, from our constituents, from the nonprofits, from the Wisconsin State Legislature, from fire department, from police department, from landlords, from developers, from people that want to become developers, I could just go down a whole list. And so after the core spaces and other activities, including Hartmeyer, I sat down and in discussion and in partnership, just said, okay, the best thing is that we just need to have an open dialogue and be able to discuss this, ask questions. Some of us get, more definitions of things, and make sure that we're all on the same page. Like, for example, the word land banking. What does that? It means one thing to one person, another to another. So I just wanted to say that it's not a perfect resolution, and if I were to change anything, I would say, what is the best avenue to do that? Is it this commission? Is it a singular group of people that are going to solve this? I don't think so. So
Thank you, Alder Burris.
Thank you.
And just to clarify for the rest of the commission, Alder Burris did register to speak for that item, but we have no other registrants, so we can open it up for General Plan Commission questions of staff and discussion. Alder Bennett.
Thank you for this, for calling on me earlier, because I'd like to speak to my alternate. I hope that all the commissioners had the opportunity to check over this item and look at version 2 that is in Legistar, which I submitted this alternate, and I really wanted to appreciate two people. One, thank you to staff who obviously has been working very, very hard on solving our housing crisis. And secondly, I want to appreciate Alder Burris for putting this forward and on our radar in the first place. I think that it is a conversation that needs to be had. Essentially, with the alternate, I really wanted to first off send this to Housing Strategies Committee. I think that the group discussion that we're looking for can be hosted in Housing Strategies, and it would ease the burden on staff to do so. And secondly, I wanted to highlight the 3 questions that Matt Wachter had spoken about earlier. Ultimately, I think that by having the due date be next year in August, by our first Common Council meeting of August, that will allow us time to have something that council can act upon, hopefully when budget season and all that comes. I truly hope that we can have discussions, bring in experts, which is something I feel like is missing in all of these discussions oftentimes. But moreover, not just rehash the recommendations that we already have, the solutions that we already have, but really make it a point that nothing is none of these conversations matter unless council takes action on this. So I submitted the alternate ultimately for the aforementioned reasons, and I hope that you would support it, but not to downplay anything else that Alder Burris or staff has been working on.
Thank you, Alder Bennett. Alder Field.
Thank you. I do have a question for staff, and it's about staff capacity. So I want to recognize that we do have a couple of real housing experts in the city, at least experts on housing policy and the realm of what the city can and can't do in housing. I'm wondering, given that those folks' time is in high demand and Lynette Rhodes among a few others, what sort of capacity would staff have to support and staff a separate independent task force as well as the Housing Strategy Committee over the next year versus a scenario where the Housing Strategy Committee may meet monthly, for example, and have hearings and stakeholder sessions with staff involved and kind of what that looks like? Thank you.
Sure. So I think you said some of the names. So Lynette Rhodes, who heads up our sort of funding unit in community development division, and her staff are the people who end up staffing Housing Strategy Committee, but also writing a lot of these reports. There's also staff from planning who do that in conjunction. So I would anticipate, yes, any sort of new task force would lean heavily on those same people who are working in housing strategy, because they're the housing people. They're the ones who are kind of are experts in it day to day.
A quick follow-up, if you don't mind. Just kind of between the two scenarios, Matt, can you speak to whether one of these paths forward would be particularly more difficult for staff to accommodate while, making all of the meetings and doing the work that they'd be assigned in between those meetings, where we have a task force as well as a committee versus just a committee that does this?
Sure. So, I mean, I think in either of them, it's going to take plenty of staff resources to do more. I think on the task force side, I think it would depend how much of the emphasis is on convening meetings for people to talk versus how much we'd be expecting, I guess, a work product to come out of it, like very specific policy kind of recommendations that need a lot of research and writing. Alder Bennett's version clearly has like a written work product that's going to come out of it, but on the task force, I'm a little less sure. Also, it depends how the cadence of meetings that would be expected will drive how much staff time and how much conflicts staff have with staffing other things in evenings.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Field. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. So I have two questions. One would be, how quickly could a task force be created and spun up to begin meeting? Would it be in the next couple of months? Or are we thinking a little bit further out?
Not exactly my area of expertise. A lot of the sort of appointments to things go through the mayor's office. So it would, oftentimes it takes us a long time to identify people from the public. I think in this task force version, it's calling from representatives from existing committees. So some of that vetting wouldn't necessarily have to happen. But Director Stauder might have a better answer than I do.
Probably not a better answer. I just wanted to note that I think it's heavily dependent on who'd like to volunteer for those roles. I think it's it's a long list of committees and commissions that the task force would draw from, and it would rely on someone from each and every one of those being ready to serve. And then I think that the task force resolution also calls for staffing from each of those committees, and so it would be a much broader staff team. That's my understanding.
Thank you. And then my second question is version 1, we will be voting to recommend the creation of the task force for Alder Burris. And option 2 is or approving to direct the current housing strategy committee to address some of the issues that are brought up in that, as well as in Matt's memo, kind of everything together, right? They're looking with the end date that Alder Bennett had in there. But kind of that's the two different things, right? Version 1 and version 2.
There's the original and the alternate are those two options. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but I wanted to follow up on making sure people knew what the versions were and what the process is that Plan Commission goes through. So Commissioner Mendez asked a good question, and maybe I can put this in a form of a question, and Heather or can verify. We have two versions. The original version that Alder Latimus Borough put forth, and then there's an alternate, and that Alder Bennett mentioned, and those are both in Legistar under the same Legistar number, and there's a little tab that you can use at the top to switch between the two versions. Isn't that correct, Heather?
That is correct, Commissioner Heck. And so the Plan Commission then would be forwarding a recommendation to the Common Council. And the Plan Commission could recommend either the original, which is the formation of the Housing Task Force, taking from, volunteers from various committees and commissions across the city, or the Plan Commission could forward version 2, which is the alternate version, which would rely on the existing Housing Strategy Committee to move this forward.
Great, thank you. Just one more quick question while I have you. And maybe Matt has an idea about this too. We've talked about the original resolution needing to have, I guess, a cooperation of both members of the public from various or residents that are on various committees, as well as staff. Do you anticipate that Alder representation might limit the available windows of opportunity for the committee to meet because Alders are on so many other committees and have so many other commitments? I'm sure you'd have to just guess at that, but just wondered if you had any thoughts.
I don't have any thoughts. I've not looked at the makeup of each of those committees to know how much conflict there is. But I agree. Alders are difficult to schedule.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those were my questions.
Thank you. Alder Duncan.
Yeah, I just to make sure I understand everything laid out. So the first one is from Alder Latimer Burris, where it's making the task force. This alternate is for it to be housed with the housing strategy committee that's already in place. Is that correct? I'm seeing head shaking. Okay, so
yes.
Okay. So would we then make a motion? Could we make a motion to accept one or the other to move forward to a vote, or how does this work? Sorry.
Sure. Good. No, good question. So eventually, after this discussion, the Plan Commission will hopefully have a motion, and that motion will be to recommend to the Common Council either the original, which is the formation of the Housing Task Force, or the alternate, which is relying on the Housing Strategy Committee, or I suppose the Plan Commission could recommend neither. But in my mind, you're likely recommending to the council either the original version 1 or the alternate version 2.
Okay.
And then there would be a second, and then there would be more discussion and a vote.
Commissioner Shepard.
Hi, yeah. This is for Steph. A couple questions. One, is this usual or appropriate for the Plan Commission to sort of decide between competing resolutions? I guess that's my first question. And the second one is with the alternate resolution that just came out. Is there a requirement, or should there be appropriate time for even the alternate to be out there for public viewing, for public response and comment?
Great questions.
If you can address those, thanks.
Sure. So with regard to the first question, which is it typical for the Plan Commission to be grappling with two different things and recommending one of them? It's not often, but absolutely it's within your purview. So this was referred to the Plan Commission and the Housing Strategy Committee to discuss and to get a recommendation. To your second question, the Common Council does have the latitude to, any alder can come up with an alternate at any time. Sometimes that even happens very, right before the Common Council meets to deliberate and make decisions. And so there's not a time constraint or requirement in this case.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems that an item that has been identified to be so important probably should have some additional transparency to it. And my final comment here to Matt, if possible, as we go through this process, could you create a visual, like charts or something that will show sort of the gap between identifying sort of the housing gap that we have in the city? Something fairly simple, straightforward that any citizen can look at and it will make sense to them. And also, and you may have this already, in terms of the housing data and where more housing is needed. Do we have that data and graphs to go with it, sort of broken down across the city in certain areas? Because the housing shortage is citywide, but it's much more demanding in certain areas. For example, in the university area and that sort. So those are just two suggestions in terms of, I'm sure you have the data already, but maybe ways to present the data, again, so more visual, and then also if you can break it down in terms of, once again, different hot spots in the city where housing is, maybe at a higher level in terms of, once again, the need for it than other areas. Thank you.
Commissioner McCahill.
Thank you. So maybe this was said a little bit while I was wrapping my head around things, but I'm just trying to do some quick research on the existing Housing Strategy Committee. So I guess I have two questions. One is, what is the current charge of the Housing Strategy Committee and how would this change that? And then the second one, which I can repeat later if necessary, is if we went with the Housing Task Force, what would be the purpose then of the Housing Strategy Committee?
So Housing Strategy Committee, the underlying ordinance directs it to sort of look at housing data and best practices and make strategy recommendations. The vehicle has typically been, well, for the early life of the committee was the biennial housing report. But then it sort of switched to using the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, and some of the comp plan work took over as the main vehicle that it was pushing out information. And it now does the annual housing snapshot as its vehicle. So we've not written a biennial housing report since 2016, partially because it would have been redundant to do it again when we were doing the comp plan, which has a lot of overlap in recommendations. One of the items that's happening in a conversation that's not part of this is Vice President Farrell-Cole has been working to rework Housing Strategy Committee and Landlord Tenant Committee and sort of possibly merging them together and updating their charge. But that's probably too much in the weeds. In general, they're tasked with looking at housing data, best practices, make policy recommendations. And then I forgot your second question.
So that kind of answered my second question, but if we were to create this task force, how would that change? I mean, I guess I'm kind of wondering if then the existing subcommittee would be redundant in some ways, or they would live alongside each other.
So, I mean, I think to go back to what Alder Latimer Burris sort of mentioned is part of I think the purpose of the task force is to bring this wider group of people together. And I think you can see from the memo, like, there are very different groups working on different pieces of housing in the city. And she had asked the question, have we ever brought these different committees together? And definitely not all of them. We've brought, it's been a number of years, but we have had joint meetings with Housing Strategy Committee and CDBG and CDA on particular topics, but we've never brought everyone together. So I think part of the purpose of the task force is to have a bigger conversation, not necessarily about a work product, but making sure that all these committees are more in line. That is something that we haven't really done. So I think the task force would, beyond creating solid policy recommendations, would facilitate, I think the purpose is to facilitate this larger group just talking to each other about housing.
Thank you. Alder Figueroa Cole. Alder? All right, I'll move on and come back to Alder Figueroa Cole. Alder Latimer Burris.
Sorry, thank you. I just had a couple of questions as far as the work product on Matt. I'm on the memo, and I'm on I don't even know what page I'm on. It's under the Housing Strategy Committee. I'm just wondering if some of those reports, and no doubt you write, I mean, like, I think you have one report that's 170 pages or something. I'm going through them. But are some of these reports that you have to do, are they for like HUD, or are they, required by the federal government? I have a couple of questions, so I don't know if you want me to shoot them all out or just go one by one.
So I can take that. So yeah, so the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and the consolidated plan are HUD required. Oftentimes they give us the basics that need to be in it. But staff are asked to go deeper into things. So what maybe could be a 40-page just bland HUD report gets extended because we get asked questions that we add to it. And something like the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, because it gets so long, and sometimes we end up writing like a short sort of Cliff Notes version for people to dig into. So we can always add to a HUD report, but we have to hit the minimum, threshold for items that HUD directs us to do.
Okay, and then my other, just have a couple of other questions is, as far as the current housing committee, they're focused around affordability. And is that looking at all the different levels of affordability within the city? So like not like public housing or subsidized housing, but also, from the beginning of housing, or even if I'm, unhoused, all the way to like if I'm trying to, do something different. For example, like if I'm going to retire and I have made some equity on my house, does it look at things like that?
Sure. So yeah, Housing Strategy Committee is tasked with all types of housing and not just affordability. So they've looked at student housing, senior housing, all types, but the truth is the things that they get to look at again and again tend to be on the more affordable side of things.
Okay, and then I was curious, and I just asking the question, is how many years has the Housing Strategy Committee? Is it 5 years that it's been? And then what has come out of that besides the reports that you or your staff authors?
Sure. So it's been around for 10 years, since 2013. So the first 4 years, it was focused on mostly the biennial housing report. And then from 2017 through 2019, it focused largely on the housing components of the comp plan, as well as the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. During COVID, like many committees, it slowed down its work, especially if anything that was not absolutely required for it to do. So then it started to focus, as it sort of came back, it started to focus on that annual housing snapshot and the recommendations in Housing Forward, where it spent a lot of its efforts. And now looking forward on their work plan, the cycle of federal reports will start again, and they'll work in conjunction with CDBG committee to pull together the data and policy recommendations that they're going to have to do for that.
Okay. And then I would just wanted to know, well, one of the questions you answered is, have these different, departments that are so judiciously work on stuff, have they come together? And I think you said not all of them at once. And so that was answered. But my other question is, would it be possible to, I know that you said at the end of one of your reports, goodness, I've been reading so much stuff. You said, it doesn't really matter how we attack this problem, that we just need to attack it. Do you think it would be helpful for people, not only the people in the community, but the people in council to be privy to the depths of kind of have a knowledge base so that we can make better decisions and understand the problem from, understand, have a base for understanding the problem? I'm talking, when I say base, let me say it's language, it's, what's happened before, as you've summarized beautifully in a lot of these reports, and, looking big, long scope. I mean, just would it be helpful for plan? Because right now I see the planning department, and my goodness, we guys didn't have you guys. We're dead in the water.
Yeah, no, I think there definitely is. And we've tried to do that in different ways in the past. So in the early years of Housing Strategy Committee, if we wrote a report on student housing, I would probably go to 8 different committees and be in front of every single alder giving a PowerPoint. This is how I spent my evenings, was going around on this lecture circuit of committees. We've also done it where we've had new councils where we spent an entire day with new alders kind of only talking about housing. We've had in the past the sort of city-sponsored conferences that are a day-long event, and most of the sessions tend to be about development and housing. So we get to talk to the public and alders. So we've done it in a variety of ways. So I think we're certainly flexible to however council wants to have a conversation, or a venue you want to create for us to talk through just sort of the basics of housing and what's happening in our market.
Okay, and then I was kind of curious because one of my observations is, affordable is always dependent on, who's seeking affordability. Means different things to different people. And then also it seems that in different areas that there's maybe the same crisis, but it's, differently focused, such as, student housing downtown, or, condominiums over here. Is that something that you guys try to, I guess what I'm saying, is that true, that it seems like there's all the same problem, but different entities involved?
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges with writing the housing snapshot. It is just a snapshot, and sometimes we do need to kind of slice the data a different way, because students just have a different situation. Seniors are in a different boat. So sometimes we've had to kind of recast the data and look at a segment with a spotlight, because things are happening just really differently to the different groups of people in the city.
Okay, and I think that's the main questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I'm ready to make a motion whenever we're done with the discussion. So just keep my hand up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to Alder Bennett.
I realize I feel like we're in questions, but what I have to say is more discussion, and I guess I'll wait till there's a motion.
Okay, thank you, Alder Bennett. Alder Wahaley.
Thank you. My question is, at the last Common Council, this agenda item was referred to the housing strategy. Should the commissioner make a recommendation, what will happen at that housing strategy meeting? So I don't know if it's going to be redundant to have this discussion again at the housing strategy.
Good question, Alder. I can take that one. So the Housing Strategy Committee will have a similar discussion on September 28th, I believe. So the Common Council referred this question to both the Plan Commission and the Housing Strategy Committee. And then the council will take the recommendations of both Plan Commission and Housing Strategy Committee when they make their final decision about how best to move forward with a focus on dealing with Madison's housing issues.
And as a follow-up also, per Commissioner Morris, is this the place to make alternate? Shouldn't have been done at the Common Council if there's an alternate recommendation?
So alternates are created by alders or groups of alders after a resolution is introduced. Groups of alders can, or individual alders can add alternates to the legislative record or legistar. And then what that means is that ultimately the Common Council is choosing between multiple options. In this case, there are two currently. And so the Plan Commission and the Housing Strategies Committee on the 28th will be recommending one or the other to the Common Council.
And final question is, the task force is charged with specific specific item or a specific topic on a specific timeline. Should this be, should the alternate be approved, how will that be different from the intent of this resolution?
I'll start and then defer to Matt. I mean, I think the main difference is the utilization of the existing Housing Strategy Committee as the body to do this work versus the creation of a brand new housing task force. And Matt, what are the other distinctions that you might want to add?
Yes, I think the main two differences are the venue for the conversation and who would be kind of at the table and staffing it. And then the other is really the breadth. I think the original is a lot of it is about the broader conversation. And my read of the alternate is that it's more about answering the questions, and it's more about the end product. So first one is a lot about, I think, process in the conversation. Second one is more focused on the work product, but you have the authors here, so they can probably speak.
As the follow-up, will there be some timeline that has to be done?
Yeah, I think they both have a timeline. The alternate, I think, has the end of the year, I think, is the date that you're looking for.
Thank you.
End of next year, sorry, not end of this year. We're definitely not going to get done by the end of 23.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Field.
I was ready to make a motion if Alder Figueroa Cole had to go, but I guess, yeah, I'll go ahead and move the alternate.
We have a motion. Do we have a second for the alternate? Alder Figueroa Cole, you are the second? Okay. Discussion? Alder Duncan? Oh, wait, no.
I was doing the second, sorry.
Okay. we had 2 seconds. That's just fine. Discussion, Alder Field, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, certainly. So I wanted to thank Alder Latimer Burris for authoring the resolution, getting us all talking about this, raising the issue to a new profile, which I think it deserves given the political gravity and the real lived experience that people are having in the housing market in Madison these days. So this, I agree, definitely is worth more study. I do think that the most appropriate venue for that study is the Housing Strategy Committee, which exists, has existing staff membership already, a schedule which we can fill in with more meetings as necessary, and many of the folks who are on that committee are, we're interested in being appointed to do that work and are subject matter experts, either realtors or developers of affordable housing. And that's not to say that we would limit input by any means, but rather the alternate is written such that we would do hearings and stakeholder listening sessions, and I think do a really deep study in the issues that were mentioned in Director Walker's memo as being some of the policy challenges that the housing market faces, that the affordable housing market in particular faces, that we can use to make recommendations back to council in an existing structure. So that's the piece where I see this being the most important. It's the existing structure has an ordinance-based mission that is consistent with the work that the task force proposal wanted to do. And I think this is a more feasible way to do it. I would also just offer some thoughts on the scheduling piece, because I think that Commissioner Heck brought up, because as an example, earlier this summer, there were a handful of alders, some who are here tonight, who wanted to work out how to meet on a recurring basis and form somewhat of a queer caucus and talk about LGBT issues in local policy. And wow, we had a very difficult time coming up with any kind of cadence that would meet our scheduling needs, because we're all appointed to different committees. And that was a real challenge when just thinking about 4 or 5 alders, let alone the volume of people that it would take to, meet quorum under the proposal and the task force. So I wanted to offer those thoughts and explain my support for the alternate. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this motion to approve the alternate also. I just wanted to mention that in my past life as an alder, I was on the Housing Strategies Committee for a while, and honestly, I mean, there were fantastic people on that committee from a pretty broad segment of the kind of housing intelligentsia, I guess, in Madison. And I always felt like that committee had the capacity to do more, and they have the expertise to do more. So I'm kind of excited about this. I think there's some potential there. I encourage folks to support this, and I actually feel maybe a little bit about Commissioner Shepard's concerns that the alternate, to me, even though it is sort of recently arrived, is actually quite simple in comparison to the original. I think both have the same goal, awesome goal of trying to get at our housing problem. And I feel like the alternate takes a more straightforward approach to making that happen. I hope some pieces of the original one will be utilized if this should go forward and pass council, that pieces and the thoughts that are in the original are utilized. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. I guess just extend some thanks to Alder Burris for kicking off this discussion, and then thanks to all the other sponsors for weighing in. I think at a glance, just holding these up side by side, I'm attracted to the task force because on paper it seems like it's meant to answer some of the questions that I want answered about how fee structures and red tape and all the things that I think are probably creating some of the problems that we're seeing. At the same time, I recognize that there's a lot of support behind this alternate, and I appreciate folks sort of laying it out sort of clearly. Folks who know more, have been thinking about this longer than I have, that they believe this existing committee is the right vessel to get this done. Otherwise, I don't think it would have been obvious to me. So I think given the discussion we've just had, I'll support the motion in front of us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Shepard.
I just want to follow up with Commissioner Heck's comments that the two resolutions to some degree are very complementary. They focus on the issue from different directions, but overall, and I support his, once again, comment that hopefully there can be some elements of, once again, the first resolution, if the alternate sort of moves forward, that elements of, once again, transparency and focusing on, once again, outreach and communication are included in that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add in Matt's presentation where he showed the different committees working on this issue. It made me think I do hope there's some opportunity for collaboration between the different committees if the Housing Strategy Committee takes this on. We have work sessions as a Plan Commission, which are a great opportunity to dig into a couple key issues at a higher level. And it would be wonderful if we could have some collaboration with the Housing Committee to figure out how we could tackle some of these things together. Alder Madison.
Thank you. I had another task, so I'm jumping in here late, and I had hoped to be here in the beginning. But just a couple notes, both in my role as Alder and also the work in my day life. So it sounds like Commissioner Shepherd had some concerns, or I'm not sure, but I remember I worked back in the day at Madison College. And so I think you would, remembering what you remember about me to hear this in that way. And so taking the work that you know me for and others know me for, a lot of my work directly impacts folks who are struggling to afford housing across Madison, whether these are young people who are on campus, whether these are single parents, whether these are folks who are actually making about $75,000 to $80,000 an hour and can't even afford in that area. And then you have folks who are literally, we have clients who are a few dollars over what the income requirements are in order to live in, sort of like income restricted, like places over there. I think the new Ellis property, for example, you have folks who are just missing a mark. And so I deal with folks on a regular basis who are kind of at every level of income up until about $90,000. And you have folks who are very low income to that, lower middle income who just can't afford or paying way above 30% for their housing. And so when I think about problem solving, the reason I supported this amendment to the resolution Alder Burris wrote is because it gets at utilizing people we already have at our disposal, and not sort of like I think sometimes folks get very excited about a new initiative, and we begin to sort of like create and spiral into this other direction without utilizing what we already have at our disposal. And in my day life, I absolutely go to subject matter experts to help me resolve issues for the long term. I also serve on the Guaranteed Income Task Force. I chaired that task force. We had an end goal, but that work is still going. And we were all approached as subject matter experts on that task force. And we got to our results. I think our work is wrapping up, but I just want to relay the importance of utilizing what we already have and not discarding, what already makes sense, but really just fine tuning what we already have and sort of putting some strong end goals on what comes out of that work group. But I am confident the reason I signed on to the amendment is because it directly impacts the work that I do in my day-to-day life. So I have actual real experience with people who are struggling with housing at just about every income level. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Alder. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to agenda item 7. Legistar number 7 through 9, which are related. 1412 Flom Road. I believe we have Colin for a brief overview. There you are. Hi, Colin.
Thought I'd make it easy for you. Thank you. Good evening, Commission. I will be very brief here. The applicant here is seeking approvals to demolish an existing gas station and convenience store to construct a car wash on a new lot to be created by CSM. Car washes are subject to a number of supplemental regulations found in the zoning code. Staff believe that the proposal either meets the supplemental regulations or will meet them per the recommended conditions of approval. Staff does believe that the standards for demolition permits, conditional uses, and land divisions can be found met. And I'm available to answer any questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. We do have registrants for this, so I will open the public hearing. Heather, can you read them into the record?
Absolutely. First registrant is David Vaughn of South Stoughton Road in opposition. David, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I don't believe there's a need for another car wash in this area. There are already 4 within a couple miles of the proposed location. And since needing a car wash means that someone will inherently have a car, driving less than 2 miles is not an issue for them. However, this convenience store is the only one within a realistic walking distance of hundreds of people in the neighborhood. My 3-year-old and I enjoy being able to go on a quick 10-minute walk round trip to pick up, some necessity that we ran out of or to get a treat. If the store is torn down, then the closest one will be about a mile away, which with a 3-year-old would take considerably longer than the 47-minute estimate that Google Maps gives. In closing, I don't believe we should destroy the little bit of walkability that the neighborhood has in exchange for a 5th car wash that would also make an already busy intersection even busier. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Catherine Rayner of Fishers, Indiana, supporting. Catherine, you have 3 minutes.
Catherine, you are unmuted on our end. You may be seeing a prompt to unmute yourself on the screen, or it may be hidden behind a tab or a different window. But you are unmuted on our end.
Hello, this is Catherine Rayner. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I actually represent Crew Car Wash in favor of the project. Just want to introduce myself. We're very excited to hopefully be a part of the Madison community and bring our family-owned business to this community. Crew Car Wash has been around a little over 75 years. It's a family-run company, and we're just excited to hopefully be a part of the community.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is John Paul Croak of Tally-Ho Lane, supporting. And John, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is JP Croak. I'm an attorney for the applicant, Crew Car Wash. I'll keep my comments brief as well. But myself and our team from XL Engineering and Crew Car Wash will be available to answer questions as needed throughout the hearing. What we have proposed is a kind of conventional automatic car wash. I think our team has done a good job in consultation with city staff designing the site flow and providing for some enhanced landscaping, screening, and building design on the site. I think it's good to point out that we're simplifying the traffic pattern on the site by eliminating one of the curb cuts on the Pflaum side of the corner. And we hope that the Plan Commission will approve the proposal.
All right, thank you. The final registrant wishing to speak is Travis Smith, also of Fishers, Indiana. Travis, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, hello, this is Travis Smith. I work with Catherine Rayner at Crew Car Wash. And just to mirror what she says, we're very excited about this site. We've been hoping to get into Madison now for quite some time, and we think this will be a really good fit. Just want to thank staff for working with us on what's a very unique site in shape and how everything lays out and fits for our first time working through the city. It's been a really great process to work with everyone, and we hope that we can bring something to the city with our family owned operation that everyone will find beneficial.
Thank you. And we do have one registrant, Reed Johns from Fond du Lac, representing Excel Engineering, who is not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And that is the list of registrants.
Thank you, Heather. Do we have any questions for the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. One quick question for the development team. Can you just describe the current situation on this property? And do you own the land, or is it do you have an option to purchase it?
Catherine, are you able to answer that question? You are muted, it looks like.
Yeah, I'll let Travis Smith. He's actually our director of real estate. He can speak on that behalf.
Okay, Travis, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, to answer your question, the property is currently under contract pending approval of the site plan and this hearing, and we have an option to buy it here in the next basically 60 days. Yes.
Okay, thanks for the answer. That was my question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions for registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Do we have questions of staff? Commissioner Shepard.
Could staff briefly talk about how, if the proposed development improves traffic and pedestrian flow in that area? It's sort of a little weird kind of space there with, once again, this sort of driveway going through, then it goes out. Can staff just talk a little bit about, once again, sort of, and there are conditions, again, in the report from traffic and engineering, but if staff can talk about any possible benefits that the proposed development may provide for vehicle movement and also pedestrians.
Yes, I can certainly take that. The applicant did come to the staff's development assistance team, at least once, possibly twice, and spent quite a lot of time working through traffic patterns with traffic engineering. The supplemental requirements for car washes in the zoning code really restricts the orientation that building can have. And so they did spend a lot of time with traffic engineering, making sure that the flow worked on the site as well as with the adjacent streets. As the development team mentioned, there are currently 3 curb cuts on the site. That's going down to 2. There's also an access easement to the property to the north. I believe they're closing that off. So less informal flow around the area. And then finally, with this development, if it is approved, it does have to be brought up to the standards for landscaping and sidewalk. And so there will be pedestrian improvements as well with the addition of the sidewalk to kind of complete that little portion of the sidewalk network in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, I'd be looking for a motion. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I need to get back to my agenda so I can make a motion that makes sense. I would move that the Plan, do we need separate motions? For
Yes,
each of these?
yes, sorry, I meant to mention that at the beginning.
Okay,
Separate for all three items.
I'll start with Legistar 79317. I make a motion that the Plan Commission approve the demolition at 1412 Flom Road for an auto service station and convenience store.
Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Commissioner Heck, would you like to speak to your motion?
I don't think so, no.
Any discussion? Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. I just wanted to real quickly just thank the registrant earlier who pointed out the loss of the convenience store here. I think we sometimes underestimate the importance that gas stations play in like a local retail function. So thanks for pointing that out. Unfortunately, I know we can't strong arm convenience stores into existence. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. See no further discussion, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing none, the motion for the demolition permit is approved unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 8 for the conditional use.
I can continue that. I'd move that the Plan Commission approve Legistar 79318 at 1412 Flom Road, the conditional use in the CCT district for a car wash.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Mendez with the second. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I would just thank Commissioner McCahill for his remarks. I think those were appropriate, and I do appreciate the public comment also.
Thank you. There's no further discussion. We will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion for the conditional use passes unanimously. And we will move on to the final item of this project, agenda item 9, the CSM.
I'll recommend that I move that the Plan Commission forward a recommendation to Council to approve 79335, the certified survey map located at 1412 Flom Road.
Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Any discussion? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to items 10 through 12 of the agenda, which are related. Legistar 79319, Legistar 79320, and Legistar 79336 for demolition permit, conditional use, and CSM of the property at 680 Grand Canyon Drive. And I believe Colin will provide an overview for this as well.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. So for this item, the applicant is seeking approvals to demolish a commercial building to construct a 4-story mixed-use building. The staff does believe that the standards for demolition permits and land divisions can be found met. However, regarding the conditional use, staff's primary question relates to conditional use standard of approval 1, which regards public health, safety, and welfare. Staff have concerns that due to its location very near the Beltline Highway and its off ramps to Gammon Road, that road noise may have a significant impact on the residents of the proposed development. Staff does note that during the development of the Odana area plan, staff raised the question to the Plan Commission whether areas adjacent to or near the Beltline Highway were appropriate for residential use, or if those areas should be reserved for commercial or employment uses. During those deliberations, the Plan Commission did decide that a mix of uses, including residential, was appropriate for these areas. Still, staff has recommended a condition strongly encouraging the applicant to include noise attenuation measures in the construction of the building. I, again, am available after the public hearing for any questions.
Thank you, Colin. We do have registrants, so I will open the public hearing. Heather, can you read them into the record?
Yes, the first registrant wishing to speak is Kevin Burrow of Greenway Boulevard in Middleton, representing KBA. Kevin, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. This is Kevin Burrow with Northern Bruce Architects. Thank you very much for your time this evening. What we have before you is proposed redevelopment of 680 Grand Canyon Drive, as you can see on the screen in front of you. It is the corner property at the intersection of Grand Canyon and West Platte Drive. This is currently a one-story retail space that we are proposing a mixed-use development for workforce housing and community service facility. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's the overall proposed layout. The building footprint is landing very much on top of the existing footprint, and we're able to provide a significant amount of green space as opposed to the existing conditions, and creating this L-shaped building, and then locating the parking area off of an existing driveway location so that you have access to surface parking and then underground parking for all residents. So it is a 4-story mixed-use building, and we are providing underground parking as well within the building, along with surface parking stalls. We've created some amenity space out in front, so outdoor gathering space for residents. We've also been deliberate about creating a loading zone at the lower portion of the building, so for ease of move-ins and access to the building to not provide any conflict on Grand Canyon Drive. And then access to the commercial space is shown up front there via the accessible walkway. You go to the next slide, please. So here you can see the overall floor plans. You got the basement layout showing the underground parking, and then on the top of the screen there's the first floor plan, and the orange space directly in front of the building is the mixed-use commercial space, which provides community service facility, which has been completely integrated into the building, so residents within the building have equal access, as do those from the general public. And we have other common area amenity space located in the center of the building, including a community room, leasing office, and exercise facilities. And then it's a mixture of 1s, 2s, and 3-bedroom apartments, several of which would have direct access entry points within or directly to their units from the exterior. You go to the next slide, please. So the upper floors, second and third floor are similar. We've got 3-bedroom units that are considered stacked flats where they have access via private staircase down for direct entry. Then we have the mixture of 1s and 2 bedrooms throughout the rest of the facility. Next slide, please. The overall design is a contemporary looking building with a significant amount of masonry and composite siding to fit in with durable, long-lasting materials. The view you see here is looking at the eastern-facing side of the building with the main entry points into the building at the front corner, and then the surface parking and leading down to the underground. You go to the next slide. There's a view of the front of the building. The main entry is located on this corner, and then we have the accessible ramp up to that level. And then access to the community service facility is also at that same level. And each of the rest of the apartments do have their own private balcony or patio space.
Kevin, that's your time.
Okay.
And our next registrant will be Kevin McDonald. One moment. Of Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica, California, representing Lincoln Avenue Communities. Kevin, you'll
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah. So here's just a view of the courtyard. You can go to next slide. Another view from the vantage point of the southwest corner again of the courtyard space. We'll have a grilling area that connects out onto the community room. Next slide. And this is a view from the west side showing some of the individual entries. Next slide, please. And here's a view of the north side facing the strip mall to the north. Next slide, please. My name's Kevin McDonald. I'm the locally based Vice President and Regional Project Partner. Thanks for having us tonight. I work with Lincoln Avenue Communities. We're a nationwide affordable housing developer, but my focus is strictly on doing affordable housing in Wisconsin. Next slide, please. Development summary, just overall, the development is a 60-unit development, 4-story building with underground parking. And then just wanted to note that the development does include affordable housing. On the next slide, I'll go through a unit mix, and we're really excited to serve the local workforce and senior population within the development. I do want to note in particular the development will be green certified development. We are also planning to do solar panels and utilize electric heat pumps and have the development almost all electric. We do have to utilize natural gas to heat the underground parking. And then in addition, we do have a partnership with EATA, who will be providing workforce development and job training within the development. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick summary on the affordable units that are in the development. So we do have a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, as Kevin identified. We have 12 units that are at the 30% county median income level. We have 24 units that are at the 50% county median income level, and we have 15 units at the 60% county median level, with the balance, the remaining 9 units are at market rate. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about timeline. So at the end of 2022, we did reach out to planning staff to confirm zoning and talk about the Odana area plan and then the local plans for the neighborhood, wanting to make sure that our plans here are consistent with the overall vision for the area. And we're really excited for the opportunity to be one of the first developments that are part of the Odana area plan.
That's your time. And then our next registrant is Matt Hass of Verona Avenue in Verona, Wisconsin, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions and representing Lincoln Avenue Communities as well. And that rounds out the registrant list.
Thank you, Heather. Do we have any questions for the registrants? Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. I'm not sure who can take this question from the development team, but first I'd like to know about any facilities you plan, interior or exterior, for children, because it's great to see so many 3 bedrooms, so I assume you'll have some families in there.
This is Kevin Burr with Canopy and Bruce. I can begin to answer this question, and perhaps Kevin McDonald might add to it. We have that outdoor gathering space that was shown in that courtyard area for an outdoor amenity. And then directly adjacent to that on the inside of the building, we also have the community room, which is set up for both families and all residents to be able to utilize that space. So we're trying to create connected space from interior to exterior that the families would have access to.
But no playground facility or anything like that?
No, not at this point. We're not planning on any playground structure per se.
Okay, and then a second question while I have you. Can you describe your thoughts about the condition that's been proposed about soundproofing and if you might take some of those measures?
Yeah, I can speak to that. We've done several developments along the Beltline Highway and are really conscious about the noise concerns. And with modern construction techniques, we're certainly able to provide a much more soundproof housing than existing conditions of any existing properties typically. So the use of masonry and composite siding plays a major impact on it. And we'll also be studying the use of the windows and the quality of windows that are installed in the building as we look to try and further mitigate any sound concerns. And then also in construction techniques, it's really important to focus in on the sealants around the windows, sealing off, trying to mitigate any voids in the exterior envelope to keep it as soundproof, so to speak, as possible by a well-sealed and airtight building.
Thanks, Kevin. And have you used any special type of glass in those other developments you've done along the Beltline?
Yes, we have in regards to those faces that are exposed to the Beltline. We have upgraded the STC rating on the windows themselves, and all the major window manufacturers that we typically work with provide an upgraded option within their window families for either unbalanced glass or just stronger or thicker glass in general.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. To kind of tag on to what Commissioner Heck asked about the sound, do you have any plans to add additional vegetation or landscaping to help reduce the sound on the outside? Since you have some gathering space.
We do have plantings that are being introduced, but not specifically for sound deadening per se. But we will be introducing some canopy trees and the like, which do help further mitigate any acoustic reverberation of sound.
Okay, and then a second question I have is, this is very close to the street as well as the Beltline access. With the gathering spaces, do you have any plans, or would you consider adding some safety fencing or barriers to protect the residents, specifically the children who would be in this area, from just running across the street into the freeway, the Beltline, basically?
Kevin, would you like to speak to that one with regards to how you want to maintain that outside space?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we would certainly be open to a landscaping buffer that would provide for an appropriate separation between the street. We also we were really conscious in how we were programming the space with the active areas as far off the street as we could. Given some of the conflicting zoning, and this development is also in a Parktown area that's has some different deed restrictions. So we had to really be careful with our setbacks and kind of how the building is designed. But we certainly incorporating some type of landscaping to provide a buffer would be something that we'd be open to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions for the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing and we will start with questions for staff. Are there any questions? Commissioner Mendez. Oh, you are on mute. Sorry. There you go.
That's all right. Thank you. So this is for staff for sure. So one of the conditional use standard 1 addresses the safety of this development. And we, as part of our motion for the conditional uses, add that they incorporate additional landscaping and or barriers to increase the safety of this development.
I may defer to Heather for any additional information, but I think if you were to kind of leave it a little bit vague so that the developer could choose what that, whether it is, an actual physical barrier or a planting strip to really differentiate the space, I think that would be appropriate.
Yes, I agree. Nothing to add to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I would be looking for a motion, and we will need an individual motion for each item 10 through 12. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you. So I move that the Planning Commission approve Westar 79319 for the consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a multi-tenant commercial building at 680 Grand Canyon Drive.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Alderfield. Commissioner Mendez, would you like to speak to your motion?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay. Do you have any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent on the demolition permit unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion for agenda item 10 is approved unanimously. And we will move on to a motion for item 11. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you. I move that the Planning Commission move forward the conditional use for a commercial center CC district for dwellings in a mixed-use building to allow construction of a 4-story mixed-use building with 185 square feet of commercial space at 680 Canyon Drive, with the additional condition that the applicant add additional landscaping and/or barrier at their discretion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Heck. Commissioner Mendez, would you like to speak to your motion?
Nope. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I have just a very minor amendment to offer. And if I can find my email, I'll read it to you. In the conditions of approval suggested in the staff report that we'll be voting on, the very first one that just needs a little wordsmithing, and I did speak with Colin Punt about this, and he thought this was appropriate. In the first sentence, it says that the applicant is strongly encouraged to include noise attenuation measures in the construction of future development within the plat, et cetera. And I think that was brought over from another development proposal. So it really should read that the applicant is strongly encouraged to include noise attenuation measures in the construction of the development, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really just kind of cleaning that up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Given the nature of that, I will take that as a friendly amendment unless I see a raised hand otherwise. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion is approved unanimously. And finally, moving on to agenda item 10 for that project, the CSM map. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you. I move that the Planning Commission approve certified survey map of property owned by 680 Canyons LLC located at 680 Grand Canyon Drive.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Alderfield. Any discussion? We will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, we are moving on to agenda item 13, Letter Star 79018. 131 West Wilson Street, Alder District 4, consideration of an alteration to an approved conditional use, the UMX zoning to approve amended plans for exterior lighting on a 15-story, 263-unit apartment building. We are back to Colin.
Yes, thank you again. So a little background. On January 9, the Plan Commission approved the conditional uses to construct a 15-story mixed-use building on this site. the applicant is now seeking approval of 2 architectural accent lighting features. One to be mounted on the underside of the soffit on the 15th floor, and another running the vertical length of the building on both the Wilson Street side and the Lake Monona facade. The UDC has granted initial approval to this request with conditions that a cap is added to the lighting at the top of the building to prevent direct view of that fixture, and that the vertical accent lighting be modified to be compliant with the cutoff requirements in the building code and the downtown design guidelines. And then also that the proposal return to UDC for their final approval. If the Plan Commission can find that the conditional use standards are met here, the Planning Division recommends that the request be approved subject to the conditions from UDC. Staff does emphasize that this is a potentially precedent-setting decision. This is a very large building, very visible from downtown and from Lake Monona. There are some instances of architectural lighting in this in these areas and downtown, but this is an especially prominent site and location with very good long views from the lake, from the parks along the lake, from John Nolan Drive, and that the building is at the Capitol View height limit. So while the Plan Commission does have the option to act and approve the alteration of the conditional use prior to UDC making its final decision, with that UDC final approval being a condition of approval, the Plan Commission also has the option to refer this until the final code compliant details have been reviewed by UDC, and then it would come back for Plan Commission's review once more. So 2 options there, and if you have further questions, I can answer those after the public hearing.
Thank you, Colin. I will open the public hearing. Heather, can you read the registrants into the record, please?
Certainly. For this item, we have 2 registrants not wishing to speak, but here to answer questions. First is Jake Buns of Parmenter Street. Second, Kirk Keller of Crossroads Drive, representing T-Wall Enterprises.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and we will open up questions for staff. Are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I just wondered if staff could discuss if there have been analogous lighting proposals in downtown buildings that you know of. Over here on East Wash, there are neon strips on tall buildings and things and some colorful lighting, but they're not right downtown. So I wondered if there have been, that you know of, other discussions like this or approvals or requests.
So Building Inspection Director Matt Tucker is here. I'm hoping that he has spent a lot of time on this question, and hoping that he may have an answer to that.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. Good evening, Plan Commission. Matt Tucker, Director of Building Inspection Division. We haven't had any requests for building architectural lighting quite like this. We did have some building architectural lighting that was installed on the building that McGrath built next to the Marina condos, and those were not approved. We required them to be unplugged, for lack of a better way of describing it. I think we did receive some complaints from neighbors about those lights, discovered they weren't approved and had them unplugged. but they're there and I suppose could be plugged back in at some point in time if they were able to gain approval. That's the only instance of this type of lighting, architectural lighting, projecting out from the face of the building that I'm aware of in the greater downtown area.
And those lights that I referred to on buildings in the Cap East corridor, they're more neon in nature, I guess, maybe more like the McGrath proposal. Would those have needed approval?
Yes, Commissioner Heck, they did require approval and they obtained approval. The lighting I think you're thinking of, there's the Galaxy and the Constellation. They both have lighting at the top of the building. Both of those projects were approved with lighting when they were approved back in 2012 or 13 and 14. So you folks might have seen there was a residential project that Gorman did at the corner of Milwaukee and East Washington that had some red lights. Those were not approved, and those we also required to be turned off. So basically the only lighting that we see of this type or that might be kind of similar that we're aware of in the greater downtown or the extension to the downtown East Wash would be those two projects I described, the Galaxy and the Constellation.
Thanks. And then just one more question. The one part of this proposal is kind of illuminating the top floor in something other than a neon type light. From what I read in the staff report, that is compliant with lighting code as far as we know, but UDC might have to fine tune it a little bit. But that's different in that it's not a neon strip. Is that your understanding?
Well, what was initially requested was basically it's not necessarily neon. It's a line of lights basically, and the recommendation of the Urban Design Commission was to put basically a small lip. If you can think of the way the light kind of goes about where my knuckles are, and they're going to add a lip so the light can't go down towards the ground. It has to go up towards the soffit. So this lighting is going to be illuminating the soffit, and it'll be refracting off of the soffit area, kind of like what you see at Monona Terrace under the arches. Rather than that line, which had been kind of the initial request, was just another line. And then the building lighting from I think about the first or second floor up to near the top of the building is a inset strip of lighting that has a shield on it that's sort of, so you don't see light fixtures, if you will, but you see a hue of light that'll be blended and it'll almost look solid going up the building. And there's just a funny technical thing that you have to do with lighting of that type when you have of that design, that you just have to shield the fixture. So it'll probably look very similar to what was being proposed, just because there's a lot of light bouncing inside that channel. But that's what the Urban Design Commission wanted to see.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'd be looking for a motion. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Mendez. Oh, you're on mute.
All right, thank you. Let me see if I can get this correct. So I move that refer Register 79018 at 131 West Wilson Street for consideration of alternative to improved conditional use to further a date to be determined after UDC has made their decision at their next meeting with this on the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner McCahill. Commissioner Mendez, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, ma'am.
Do we have any discussion on the motion? This would be to refer to after UDC's review, final review. Seeing none, we will come to a vote and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 19, Legistar 79524, creating section 28.022-00627 of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning at property located at 6853 McKee Road from PD GDP to PD SIP, Alder District 7. I believe we have Lisa here to review this. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay, so before the commission tonight is a plan development specific implementation plan for 6853 McKee Road. And just as a reminder, the specific implementation plan is subject to the approval standards for both zoning map amendments and plan developments. So earlier this year, the Common Council approved an amended general development plan, which allows for a 2-story, 10,000 square foot commercial building on this site. And the general development plan also allows all uses permitted and conditional in the commercial corridor transitional district. So per the approval standards for plan developments, the commission should consider whether the specific implementation plan is consistent with the approved general development plan. So the applicant proposes to construct a 2-story, 10,390 square foot commercial building, which would be used for a funeral home. And the first floor is approximately 7,440 square feet and includes a lobby, chapel room, social hall, and meeting room. And the second floor is approximately 2,950 square feet. And it includes kind of an open office area and then a mechanical and storage room. And there is a 2-story component and a 1-story component of the building. The 2-story component has a height of about 29 feet and 10.5 inches. And the 1-story component has a height of approximately 27 feet and 8 inches. So regarding the use, a funeral home is a permitted use in the CCT district. And this means that there are no conditional use approvals required or any modifications to that zoning text that was approved with the GDP in order to establish a funeral home on this use. So in this way, the proposed use is consistent with the general development plan and doesn't require any additional approvals. Staff did want to talk a little bit about, obviously, the building height. So the GDP has a requirement that the building has to be 2 stories at a minimum. And the zoning administrator has determined that the building would be considered a 2-story building based on the commonly applied interpretation that to be considered a 2-story building, only a portion of the building must have a second floor. So from a planning and zoning perspective, we feel that having a 2-story component can be found to meet the intent of that requirement. And, we can acknowledge that while the building meets that technical definition of a 2-story building, it's really important to pay close attention to the design of the building and specifically whether it meets that plan development standard E, which basically states that the plan development, shall create an environment of sustained aesthetic desirability. And as required by zoning ordinance, the Urban Design Commission reviewed the specific implementation plan to make a recommendation regarding the overall building and site design. So the UDC made a recommendation for initial approval with conditions. And the recommendation for initial approval signifies that the UDC believes that the overall concept meets the relevant standards, though modifications to the design should be included before final approval is granted and before permits can be issued. So the conditions ask the applicant to revise the placement of the windows, revise the application of the building materials, so kind of reconsidering how that stucco, the 2 different stucco colors are applied, and then also revise the landscape plan. And then specifically, the UDC asked the applicant to take another look and revise the proportions, sloping, and massing of the roofs. So earlier, I mentioned the building heights of the 1 and 2-story component, and they're very similar, which really results in a larger roof mass on that 1-story component. So they wanted them to take another look, basically take another look at that. And staff believe that with the recommended conditions of approval, they could kind of help emphasize both the structure height, so looking at that 2-story kind of requirement and element, and then also reduce the mass of that 1-story component, which would result in a project that meets that plan development standard E. So in conclusion, staff believes that the specific implementation plan can be found to be consistent with the approved general development plan. And, staff would just kind of emphasize that our primary questions were more related to the design considerations, especially to plan development standard E. And considering the design recommendations of the UDC, staff believe it is possible for the zoning map amendments and plan developments to be met with the recommended conditions of approval. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I will open the public hearing. Heather, can you read any registrants that we have into the record, please?
Yes, this evening we have 2 registrants from the applicant team. First is Roman Ryan of North Sherman Avenue, I believe representing the applicant. Roman, you have 3 minutes.
Hi there, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, good evening. My name is Roman Ryan, 3rd generation funeral director with Ryan Funeral Home. Long story short, my grandpa Paul in 1938 moved 7 of his 10 kids to Madison and opened up a funeral home in downtown Madison, where he never owned a building but rented at several different locations around downtown. In 1966, my dad branched off from him on Sherman Avenue, just up the street from where we are now. And then in the 70s, built his first funeral home on Sherman Avenue, where it is today. In the year 2000, we acquired the Odana and Verona funeral homes from the Joyce family, and eventually built a funeral home in DeForest, all in not a short period of time, but it seems short to us based on the fact that we only had 1 funeral home. The one on Odana is a funeral home that we purchased back in 2000, and it just doesn't fit our needs. It's got stairs coming in the front doors. It's a small funeral home, and we have sold that building under contract to Smart Motors, and we are in an agreement to purchase the land from Livesey on the aforementioned property. We have built a funeral home that is we took under consideration from design, and actually, since talking to them, we've made some huge improvements to the design that we're super happy with. And we look forward to serving the west side of Madison, continue to serve the west side of Madison, in a facility that is second to none in Dane County, maybe the state. This will be a very rare funeral home. There will be no crematory or processing or embalming in this facility. Years ago, each funeral home had to have a prep room. They don't anymore. If you have a cluster of funeral homes, one may have the preparatory area where the others don't. So no embalming, no cremation. That's all done on Sherman Avenue. Yeah, and the traffic was kind of an issue in one of our meetings. It's really not an issue. It's just a non-issue with cremation and lack of funerals compared since COVID. So we're excited. We've been battling this for 3 years, and we see the goal line, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Roman. Next registrant is Brad Koenig of Parmenter Street in Middleton, representing Sketchworks Architecture. Brad, you have 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commission. Again, Roman kind of gave an introduction on the project itself, talk a little bit about site and review kind of architecture. Building site is located on the western half of the vacant property. It is on the corner of Golden Copper Lane and McKee Road, as indicated below. Next slide, please. Adjacent structures are multifamily residential and condominiums. So you can kind of see a few example photos there of what the type of style of architecture there is currently on site. Next slide, please. The landscape plan on the building site. Building is located along McKee Road with a signifying main entry gable off of McKee Road. The main entrance into the parking lot will be to the south off Mater Road. So all traffic will go either through the private road of Golden Copper Lane or Mater Road to be dispersed onto McKee. There was a lot of comments and questions in our neighborhood meeting about traffic, and I think from a flow standpoint, city staff responded appropriately where McKee Road is really designed for large mass of traffic, and with Roman's comments about the number of funerals and the small nature of them now, more than ever, traffic they feel is not an issue and should be properly dispersed. The landscape plan that we have here, heavily landscaped, really focusing the landscape along the western edge to provide some kind of vegetation between the adjacent multifamily building to the west and kind of mask the parking lot as best as we can. Again, this is a two-story structure, as Lisa had mentioned. Next slide, please. Building design, floor plate, like Roman said, there's no cremation, there's no embalming, so none of those rooms are needed. It's really a chapel, so much like a church. And then there's a social hall for social gatherings and lobby, and that can be used. There's been discussions with Yalder about community events, polling place. Really, it wants to be a fixture for the neighborhood to use and to rent out. There also is a meeting room along with that. So that's the first floor. Next slide. There is an outdoor patio as well tied to the social hall. Second floor really is unneeded for the spatial or the space program. However, due to the nature of the Plan Commission conditions at the GDP level, we did add a second story above the social hall and common spaces for both mechanical and future office space that might be needed. Why we didn't build over the entire space is that the chapel itself has a unique kind of tray and coffered ceiling, and so we're looking for that vertical height to really express.
That completes your 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And that is the end of the registrant list for this item.
Thank you, Heather. Do we have any questions for the registrants? Alder Field.
Thank you, Chair. Hello. I was wondering if, given the requirement that the building be 2 stories tall, the team had ever considered a mixed use, perhaps finding a tenant or another service that could go upstairs.
Is that something that Roman can answer, perhaps?
Here I am.
There we are.
Thank you. Back in the old days, families would live above their funeral home. It's not a good situation with odors of cooking food and or noise traffic on the floor. It's just kind of a non-starter.
Alder Field, does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I suppose, we have other buildings in Madison where there's maybe a restaurant on the bottom floor that would also have odors of food. I'm thinking just about whether the applicant had considered any other neighborhood serving kind of services or spaces to go upstairs, given that it was required to be 2 floors. So if the applicant could maybe speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I just feel, would it be nice to get more rental revenue from that space? It'd have to be a very unique opportunity, like some type of office where it's really quiet. I just don't know what would fit the bill for that. It can't be living quarters. It can't be a bar. And it'd have to be like a little insurance guy sitting in the corner up there with very foot traffic coming through the funeral home to get to his office. And eventually we are considering, doing things up there ourselves for offices and other things that may come along that we're thinking about doing in the future with funeral service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. This is probably for Brad from Sketchworks. I may have missed it, or maybe it was coming in your presentation, but have the landscaping items that were suggested by UDC and listed in the staff report, were those already in your renderings, or are those things you're still working on?
Those are things that we're still working on. The landscape plan that I had in my presentation is about 99% there, with the response to the UDC comments from September 6th. But we are, as we look at the architecture and we look at the elevations, we are massaging a little bit of that so it can relate to the architecture in general with the landscape plan.
Okay, so there still could be some changes, but you're close.
Yes, very close.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions for our registrants? Alder Duncan.
With the UDC still having to have final approval, is this similar to the previous vote that we just took, where we could potentially refer this to a later meeting until the UDC has provided their final approval?
We are still in questions of registrants.
right.
Can I hold that for questions
Yep.
of staff? Thank you. Alder Wahaley, do you have a question for the registrants?
No, I have a question for the staff.
Okay. If we have no further questions for the registrants, I will move on to questions for staff and ask if Alder Duncan would like to ask his question.
Yep, I can ask again. So I was just asking to see, with this being similar to the previous resolution that we had, would we potentially be able to refer this to a later meeting pending UDC's final approval?
I guess I can take that one. Yeah, the commission could decide to refer the item and see it back again after the UDC, gave final approval. That said, it is quite common for the commission and even the council to act on an item that has initial approval from the UDC, even though it would need to go back to the UDC for final approval, addressing the conditions.
Thank you.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Heather, did you say that is pretty common for these to go from here to council after the first review? Okay.
It's very common for the Plan Commission to act and the council to act if there's just an initial approval from the Urban Design Commission.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Alder Wahaley.
Thank you, Commissioner. So my question is for Lisa. Lisa, I was in the UDC, and some of the recommendation was specifically for the windows. And per your staff report, you indicated that just to modify. And I think from the meeting, there was specific, and I don't know if it's still open for Brad, if you can show the structure of the windows. There was specific requirement that they had to implement to make the changes. But in your report, you just alluded to just making the changes. Can you talk to specific of what the UDC commissions requested to in terms of the windows?
Sure. So I think that there was specific discussion at the UDC about how the window treatment could be changed. The condition itself that was approved by the UDC was more vague just that they need to revise the or that they should revise the window placement. I think so. I don't know exactly what the discussion was, but I think the intent of that condition is that by providing that, that they should revise the window placement, the UDC will refer to the discussion they had, at the meeting and the minutes of the meeting to determine whether or not they're kind of meeting the intent. And I think they wanted basically like more windows in general, kind of a more treatment. So I think one of the things they talked about was like kind of a spandrel treatment at the top of the windows, are a couple other things, but unfortunately I don't have like the verbatim discussion that they had at the UDC.
Yeah, I think I remember it was more like it was not very much consistent. Some windows, the front, especially the one that was facing the PD, was small at the lower floor, and then the upper floor was more bigger. So I'm wondering, like if that's something that we need to make sure that if we are making conditional recommendation, that those windows should be included to implement the request of the commissioners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the Plan Commission has like specific design recommendations, they could also include that as a part of their motion. I think I can read just for the record the condition language that was recommended by the UDC. So the language that we have is that the building design shall be revised to address the following design issues as noted by the Urban Design Commission in their discussion, including looking at the windows again, the location of where there's stone versus stucco, and also the proportions and sloping and massing on the roofs. So again, it does kind of defer or refer more to the discussion that was happening at the commission, but I know that both like the size, the number, and like the general presence of the windows was a part of that discussion, and about how that can relate a little bit more to the 2-story component and just increasing the glazing in general.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And just to clarify quickly, UDC does have their own staff reports linked in your staff report, correct? That has more of that detail and bullet points of the discussion. Yes, thank you. Commissioner Heck.
On a related note, Lisa, I think you mentioned this, that your impression is that UDC will use their more detailed notes when they judge whether or not something has met the spirit or letter of what they were requesting. That's my experience with UDC. Isn't that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah. Yes. Yep. And they do create a report for each item in UDC where they list everything in a more bulleted kind of, this is what the discussion was in general, so that they have that as a document of record, which I can also try to pull up and see if we can speak a little bit more to their specific discussion about some of those design elements.
Sure. And I know they sometimes refer informally to their discussion, even if it's not in the notes, right? To their previous discussion. And you mentioned that we could add design related things that Plan Commission requires, but we don't have to, but it's an option.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Mendez.
I just want to clarify. So we're deciding on this item if we approve the zoning change, correct? We're not deciding on what goes there per se. We're deciding that it meets the plan, and that the zoning, we recommend changing the zoning for this. Is that correct?
So our plan development zoning district is a little bit it's different than from our standard zoning district. So say if this was a zoning map amendment to commercial corridor transitional district, we would expect probably maybe to see like a conditional use that is specific to the building design, the site planning, things like that. But the plan development district is a site specific, unique zoning district for this property. So the general development plan is typically more of like a big picture, what do we expect to see on this site? So that's when they approved the allowable uses, where they referred to, on this site, we think that the uses in the CCT district would be appropriate. They want to see a 2-story building, 10,000 square feet. So you're not approving like the building design, let's say, or the landscape plan through the general development plan, but you're establishing kind of the basic parameters for development. And then the specific implementation plan, you are approving, the building, the parking, things like that, because what they're proposing is a permitted use. You're not technically approving a funeral home at this location. You're really approving the building design, parking lot, things like that. So, the way I kind of think of it is that you're not approving the use, but the use, obviously, you want to make sure there's enough parking for a funeral home, like things like that. So, there's a little bit of a balance there maybe, but technically, you are approving, this would enable them, once they satisfy the conditions of approval, to apply for a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for staff? Seeing none, I'd be looking for a motion. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I'll move that the Plan Commission recommend creating section 28.022 to 00627 of MGO to change the zoning at property located at 6853 McKee Road from PD-GDP to PD-SIP, and that's it.
Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Would you like to speak to your motion, Commissioner Heck?
Yes, please. I appreciate the interest in some of the design matters that have come up in comment and discussion, but I feel like those are items that the Urban Design Commission is capable of handling, and they don't need to come back to us. Then again, we just did have a kind of an unusual conditional use approval that we did refer to UDC and ask for it to come back. But I feel like these conditions of approval related to design matters and landscaping are things that we have approved time and time again on many development proposals, because it's really something that UDC is also very adept at dealing with. And I feel like if we were to refer it, we'd just have this same discussion again. And honestly, I'm not equipped to approve the window design. This is not something that I think Plan Commission should delve too far into, although I do appreciate that there were those discussions and they need to be addressed, but I just don't really think that that's something Plan Commission should delve into. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Wahaley.
Thank you, Commissioner. As an alder of this district, I feel this should be referred to UDC. The reason being that this needs to be finalized. This project has been at the UDC several times with many changes, and there's always a need to change. And I feel like, with the conditional approval, if it goes to the UDC, then comes back to the Plan Commission and then back to the council, that will give enough time to take care of some of those details in terms of how the structure of the building. We have a concern about this is not exactly a 2-story building. Per last year's recommendation, there was intentionally there was request to have a 2-story building, and this is not 2-story building. And to even look at it, it's not. There's the two sides of the side. There's apartment buildings, which is 3-story building, and this will not be consistent with the design of the neighborhood. So additionally, there was specific request in terms of how the structure of the building, and I don't feel like it's ready yet to be approved and then to be sent to the Common Council. So I'll request the commissioners to refer to the UDC and then back to the Plan Commission and finally to the Common Council, just the way you did the resolution before this agenda.
Thank you, Alder. And just to clarify for discussion of this motion, this will still go back to UDC for final approval. They will have to issue final approval based on their comments. This is just a slight different in the timing and order of that. Okay, seeing no further discussion, we have a motion and a second. I will assume unanimous consent for the motion unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion is approved unanimously. Okay. Moving on to our last item. This should be quick. We are going back to our more somewhat informal discussion of the comp plan interim update. So continuing from our last work session, we did get through a lot of things. Thank you everyone for your work on that. So we will continue with the public, with the revisions proposed by the public, which were not identified as green or yellow by staff that we went over in the last meeting. So we will go through those that commission members have identified they would like to discuss further and any others that could be raised now. We also have to go over the text amendments that were proposed. So before we start down going into some of the specific map amendments, I guess I will start with opening the public here. Does staff want to make a brief presentation? Do we want to just go quickly to public comments?
We don't have public, we don't have registrants wishing to speak this evening. I will double check quickly here and just make sure that there haven't been any later additions. Bear with me for just a moment. But then I do believe that Kirsty Lotch would provide a quick overview before we get started. No, there have not been any additions. We have just one registrant willing to answer questions, and that's Jason Ilstrup of West Washington Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Heather. So I will turn it over to Kirsty.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Kirsty Lotch. I use they, them pronouns, work in the planning division. Good to see you all again this evening. So I thought that I would just start with a pretty brief screen share to make sure we're all on the same page. Are y'all seeing my full screen?
Yes.
Okay. It's the Word doc list. For some reason, it's not indicating which screen is shared. Thank you for confirming that. So we've got the items that were listed to continue discussing include applications 1 through 3, 4 through 8. A plan commissioner had flagged items 17 through 42. And I think there's a few of those that we could focus in on once we get to that. And then application 48. So I think we talked about just kind of continuing the way that we did it the last time with a little staff summary as we get started. So I think we can go ahead and jump into the first one here, unless there's anything else we should talk about briefly. Does that sound all right? Okay. So then we're going to start with application 1. It's mapped as application 1. It included applications 1 through 3 that were combined and mapped in one place here on the generalized future land use map. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Brian Grady to provide the background for this one.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, if you just want to leave your screen up, this works out great. Hi, everyone. Again, Brian Grady, Planning Division. I use he, him pronouns. I give just a little bit of an overview of this request and kind of staff's some context, I guess, for the Plan Commission's consideration. So yeah, as Chrissy mentioned, we combined 1 through 3 into this one blue outline here. So we're in the Elderberry Neighbor Development Plan, which the city updated back in 2018. And we'll note that we did when we set out the parameters for this interim update, and then also when we communicated with the public, we conveyed that we would be focusing on recommending the public submit amendment requests in areas outside of our recent planning efforts. And so this one is incorporated. It was from 2018, 5 years ago. It's been incorporated into the current comp plan GFLU map. And so it is in that recent planning area, but we've still reviewed these submittals and we'll consider those tonight. So that applies to this one, number 1, and then also 4, 7, and 8, the next few that we'll consider. So this is in the Elderberry NDP. We did a full update of that plan back in 2018. The Elderberry NDP recommends housing mix 1. That's mapped then as low residential in the comp plan GFLU map as we translate that category. The request was to change like kind of the southern third or so to low medium residential and the northern, say 2/3 or so to medium residential. The request indicates a kind of desire for doing some missing middle or maybe a apartment development. And so they also cite some of the facts, some things that we know that yes, housing is very expensive in Madison. They mentioned the single family homes in this area, the cost of the homes in this area, maybe in general. Also the blue blob to the north there is a elementary and middle school site in the Milton Cross Plains School District. This number 1 area is adjacent to just the south is the Eagle Trace neighborhood, Viridian's neighborhood. I will say that when we did the city of the NDP update back in 2018, we were aware of the school site. We were aware of Viridian's proposal. We were aware of everything that they mentioned in the application. I think it's just a question of what the land use recommendation is. Want to mention that housing mix 1, and we included in the memo to the Plan Commission that housing mix 1 and low residential does not equate to single family homes. You can do a variety of things, hence the terminology housing mix. And so the housing mix in the Elderberry NDP recommends single family homes, 2-unit, 3-unit townhomes. A good example is just to the east of this area along Burnt Sienna Drive. There's the Chapel View condominiums, and so there's kind of attached housing that was developed in housing mix 1 or low residential. And so we want to emphasize that that it's not just limited to single family. I think overall to switch the site to medium residential when the NDP was just adopted in the last 5 years to me as a staff person seems like quite a jump. And so we suggested not making a change here, but want to get more direction from the Plan Commission on this one. I'll also mention that the church to the north, as Kirsty pulls up the aerial photo here, the church to the north is could be redeveloped over time. And actually, some of it was developed in those Chapel View condominiums. And so, if that church were to be redeveloped, I think it's kind of new, but that it could be considered for LMR, low medium residential, maybe some medium density residential under the language in those text edits that Chair Solheim mentioned. And so, overall, staff suggesting kind of remaining at low residential. I guess if you were to consider something, maybe not going to the jump of the medium residential, given the recent plan update. With that, I'll turn over to the commission for any questions or comments.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Just for context, and this is the one on the west side, yes. How is the school that is in that neighborhood?
How old is the school? I think what you're seeing there is an elementary school, but I feel like maybe they have added or will be adding a middle school to that location as well.
Okay. And I think when I was looking at the map from just like the map that shows the area, the businesses on the area, there's 1 or 2 fire stations nearby.
Yeah, right next to the next ones we'll cover. There is a fire station on South Point Road. It's maybe like it's about a mile and a quarter to the southeast of here.
Mhm. And then there's also the Conservancy, which is a green space, a big green space in this area.
Yep, Pope Farm Park. Yep.
So granted, I did look and see if we had transit going over there. It's kind of far, but I mean, why wouldn't we want to put more density when we already have infrastructure that is walkable, walking to school, walking to the conservatory, having already the infrastructure for the fire department? That's the reason I'm struggling with this one. Why would we, knowing that we have resources on this area, why the hesitance to create more density?
Yeah, I think, Kirsty, if you just kind of zoom out just a little bit to show like Mineral Point Road to the south. And so when we updated these three, we actually updated this NDP along with the one to the south, Pioneer, and the one to the east, Junction. So we updated three large areas at once. And so all those things were considered. And so as you look at this map here, kind of the pink area to the south along 4 and 8 there, it's Mineral Point Road. That's like the major arterial through this area. That area we think could have transit over time. And so we've located the most intensity in terms of employment and also more intensive residential uses along that corridor. I think along Old Sauk, we do have a variety of housing types along that run. Doesn't have transit now. Probably won't have transit in the future. This is kind of the edge. What's shown in color on this map is the edge of our city over time. And so that was just something that was considered in laying out the plan. I think, again, if there's a desire for more density, I think staff would, again, we weren't anticipating opening up our recent plans to kind of be reconsidered through this process. But if more intensity was suggested, then the Plan Commission could consider a different category. And then certainly, again, the housing mix it does recommend a mix. It's not just single family recommended for this property.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I still don't understand if we had the resources. It's not like they're asking for more density on an area that is, that doesn't have established resources already, and having 2 schools for people to walk to. Yeah, we'll need metro to connect them to other things, but right there, having a school right in the neighborhood, I don't know. I don't know. I see if other commissioners have any comments on that, but that's where I'm coming from. Like, I want to understand, if we have resources, why not make it more dense?
Thank you, Alder Field.
Thank you, Chair. I think part of my confusion from this one, from our last meeting, came from the member of the public who registered on this item and mentioned something about the order of the adoption of the Elderberry Neighborhood Plan and the comp plan. And so, Brian, do you mind just speaking to the order of the adoption and the impact of recommendations on the comp plan one more time for me? Just, I want to be clear before I give my feedback.
Yeah, so this one, I think the Elderberry NDP and the other adjacent NDPs were adopted in like July of 2018, and so the comp plan was adopted in August of 2018, and so it was right. They were kind of happening at the same time, but we were able to roll in the updated NDP maps for these 3 areas into the 2018 comp plan GFLU maps. So we were able to roll that in. And then it does reflect that NDP. And then the other factors cited were Viridian's Eagle Trace neighborhood, the school. But yeah, the school we've known about since 2009. We knew that an elementary would go at that site and a middle school could go at that site. Viridian's Eagle Trace was already basically submitted to the city. And so I think just want to convey that the factors that were cited in the application, the city was aware of those factors. I think part of it is just, again, with these recently adopted plans, overall, the staff's really looking forward to those area plan processes that are more thorough processes to consider changes when more things to be considered, including access to city services like fire stations and transit, et cetera, key considerations. We've just really been hoping to rely on those thorough process. And so here we've got a thorough process done in 2018 for us to go in and change it when we've communicated to the public that we're not seeking requests in areas with recently adopted plans like this one. I think part of our concern is just that we may have discouraged folks from applying for changes just like this because they're in the recently adopted plan areas. Still up to the Plan Commission's consideration, but we have communicated a preference to not include requests, say Elderberry NDP, South Madison neighborhood plan, Odan area plan, et cetera. But I can see I can see it. These are all tough calls. So I can see different perspectives.
I appreciate your understanding on that point, and also your explanation of the timing. That explains the nuance of the adoption order that the registrant alluded to, and then the reality that those recommendations were put in the comp plan. So I thank you. Nevertheless, I would still support low, medium residential here. I can see why medium might be a more dramatic jump than what staff are comfortable with. And yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Heck?
Thanks. I guess I wanted a reminder. We're kind of trying to come to consensus, but we don't necessarily have to on all of these items. It's kind of everybody just weighing in as they care to, right?
Correct. General discussion, especially if there's, we can't actually come to a consensus on this. It will continue on for consideration when we actually make a motion later in a future meeting.
Okay, well then I'll weigh in on this one. I lean more towards what staff is recommending, but absolutely appreciate the need for more density. I feel like the lack of opportunity for other people to weigh in is important. And, I might consider low, medium residential for this, as Alder Field said, but I feel like we're kind of opening a can of worms a little bit, but I'll think about it.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll kind of build off of that. I think, as nice as increased density and potentially some folks being able to walk to some stuff is, I really wrestle with the chicken and egg problem of, do we want higher density in very outlying areas with limited transit service? If that transit service never comes, it's just more traffic, more vehicle miles traveled. So I think if we were going to make a change like this, it should be part of a more comprehensive process.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Figueroa Cole.
I mean, I don't disagree with everything said, except that I didn't open this can of worms. This process was the can of worms. Like, I still don't understand the process as a whole. Like, if we are not going to make changes on plans that are X years old or whatever, then we shouldn't even have them on the list to begin with. You know what I mean? So I don't disagree with what Heck and McCahill has said, but we just had, I don't know how long, an hour discussion about housing, a housing task force. And yes, but I just want, again, even though the process was explained to us last time, I may have to go to staff and have a one-on-one because I don't understand why we even discussing this if one of the reasons is because it's the newer plan and we shouldn't do it because of that. So.
I guess for this, I'll move over to Kirsty first.
It's just as if I could respond.
Yes, of course.
This, as Brian summarized pretty briefly, this was one of those areas in which we We had made changes within the last 5 years. So as staff, we're just, because it was adopted almost at the exact same time as the comp plan, in staff's mind, it pretty much seems to be very similar to those other plans that we did say these are excluded from the process, but because it was adopted just before the comp plan, technically we did not include it within those plans that were an area that was excluded. So it's one of those gray areas for sure.
So, with the sense of trying to keep us moving forward here, if seeing that we don't have a full consensus on this one, I'm inclined to leave it on the list for future discussion when we review this, when it is referred to us by the council and moves forward. Is that reasonable? I'm seeing middle of the road, and which just further reinforces that we don't have consensus. Heather.
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. So if we find this evening through this informal discussion that there's no consensus, or we think these are worth discussing, let's put them in the bucket that gets introduced and sent back to the Plan Commission later this fall. If we otherwise, if the Plan Commissioners kind of all come to consensus, send us a strong signal, yeah, this proposal is one that we don't want to see again. I think we can remove that from the list of dozens of proposals that you'll see back. So let's have that be our goal this evening, and just for the sake of time, I think we don't need to push for a consensus if it's not easy. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Heather, for that guidance. I appreciate it. Okay. So Christy, I think we'll turn it back to you to go over the next then.
Yeah. So for this one, I'm actually going to hand this one over to Ben Zellers to describe, but then I'll be covering, I think, the remainder of the next items.
Thanks, Kirsty. Ben Zellers, Planning Division. So these three, number 4, number 7, number 8, are on the far west side, just south of Mineral Point Road, 2 of them fronting Mineral Point Road. All 3 of them currently designated as employment in the comp plan future land use map. Number 4, the request is to change to a mixture of neighborhood mixed use, high residential, community mixed use. 7, request to change to medium residential, and 8, request is changed to neighborhood mixed use. In general, staff is recommending that employment be maintained for these 3. This was an issue that was discussed again as part of the same neighborhood development plan update process that Brian had mentioned previously, where the 3 far west side neighborhood development plans were updated. In particular, application number 7, the commission had specified that industrial, back when the neighborhood development plan was under consideration, that industrial or employment was appropriate. And actually number 7 is immediately adjacent to the kind of currently developing city west side public works area, which is just to the south. And so that's one reason, especially for number 7, that this potential change in future land use may not be appropriate. There's somewhat of a greenway buffer immediately to the south of that, but that residential could be, if it was changed, right up against city public works campus, so to speak. In general, staff feels that it's appropriate to kind of maintain some areas for future employment, and those areas tend to kind of lag development of residential in some instances. And so we certainly realize that and acknowledge that. At the same time, there have been some changes to previous employment areas that have chipped away on a little of the reserved employment area along this corridor. So in some respects, that could make the remaining employment even a little bit more important to maintain, to allow for some mix of uses in this area down the line. So that's largely it. Maybe number 8, if the commission does feel it's appropriate to make some changes, that's the area that was requested to NMU. And so if changes are made in that area in particular, staff feels that if those changes were made, MR might be a little bit more appropriate. But overall, we feel employment is still appropriate to be maintained in this area. Turn it back over to the commission for discussion questions.
Thank you, Ben. Alder Duncan.
So as Alder of District 1, this is right up the street from me. I guess my question is from the standpoint of what was stated earlier, that public transportation may potentially come out this way. I know right now Junction Road is where the new BRT station is going to begin, but with 8 and even 4, having more mixed use area there where you could potentially have restaurants and coffee shops around there. I know in talking with people in the Acacia Ridge, Cardinal Glen, and Thousand Oaks neighborhood, they would love to have stuff that is walkable, and looking at having employment would employment, I guess, allow coffee shops or restaurants that people would be able to walk to?
Heather?
Yes, great question. So that, this is just the general future land use, but it comes with a menu of different zoning districts that could be applied to the site. And most of our employment zoning districts do allow for restaurants, coffee shops, et cetera, often as a conditional use. Whereas in the mixed use zoning districts, those uses are allowed as a permitted use. So I think it's a good question, good clarifying question. I will say that one thing we've seen as planners for years and years is difficulty really getting the commercial elements of mixed use areas in the peripheral areas of the city like this. And what I mean by that is that it's much easier to build a large residential building with maybe a very, very small commercial space that may go vacant for years and years and years than it is to really construct buildings that have a viable commercial first floor and residential above. And so that's why in some of these peripheral plans, you'll see very small nodes of purple, really trying to concentrate that neighborhood mixed use at one corner so that it does become more viable and more focused.
Thank you. Alder Duncan, do you have any further questions? You are on mute, sorry.
There we go. I thank you, Director Stouter, for giving that information. I would like to say that I potentially would like to see more housing in this area, especially where up at the top part of Mineral Point right now, there are a lot of apartments and buildings that additional either in the 7 or the 8 range could potentially assist. I know that there is a school that's going to be being built down in the Acacia Ridge area that would be walkable from a 7 or an 8. And there's also the fire station right next to the plot number 7. So just maybe thinking of changing these for more density housing would be beneficial in my eyes.
Thank you, Alder. One thought I had looking at this was, the timing seems a little pretty similar to the one we just reviewed, but in this case, there is a lot of variety in the map in terms of colors and different types of things, whereas the prior one gave me a little pause because it was so much low residential. And Kirsty and Heather, could you clarify? I think some of the text amendments that we're reviewing later would add some clarity, and for these general commercial areas, instances where it would be appropriate to have more residential buildings.
Yes. We do have some text about that. I think it talks kind of about access to, in terms of employment uses, we would want access to amenities and services. I think, there's also some specific language about access to the Beltline would be a good case for keeping something employment. So there's some details about that specifically that we can go over.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on these proposed amendments? And the staff recommendation is to not move forward with them at this time. Alder Duncan, would you like to keep them on the docket for the next meeting to review?
I would, but if I'm the only person, I also don't want to be the only
You're
person like to
Alder
hold
for
them up.
this area, so I think that we should keep it on Alder Figueroa Cole. Yes.
Again, same reason for sure. We should kind of dig into it. The same reason as before.
Okay. So we will keep this on the list for further discussion. Okay, thank you. Kirsty, I will turn it back to you to move on to the next.
Perfect. That sounds good. So for the next items, there was, that's not the correct attachment. I'll pull up a map here that we attached to Legistar recently. So the next items that we'll be moving on to are include the applications submitted by Downtown Madison Inc. 17 through 42. Those were, I guess, I'll say flagged by Commissioner Field, if I remember correctly. So just to get started here as we discuss some of these items here, I just wanted to note this additional map on Legistar that has some more information on it, including, hopefully it's easy enough to read, but there are labels for each of the 26 or so applications that say what the comp plan recommended for each application or each amendment, what the Regent Street South Campus plan, which is typically the most relevant plan recommended in terms of height, as well as what Downtown Madison Inc. or the applicant requested for each of the blocks. And staff did have a follow-up conversation with Jason Ilstrup from Downtown Madison Inc. To kind of just discuss a few of these and get a better idea of what it is that DMI was looking for in terms of changes. And Jason let us know that they're specifically most interested in talking about items 20, 29, 36, and 37, which are circled in black here on this map. And they had also mentioned those 4 specific sites in their latest letter to Plant Commission, which I think was provided maybe on September 7th or September 6th. So I think staff's suggestion is that we would focus on those 4. And we could, of course, talk about others. And then Commissioner Mendez had also flagged 25, 26, 27, and 28, and those are all of the ones that are like the brown colored blocks, and those are high residential. So if it sounds all right with everyone, I think we can get started with 20, which was one that DMI had requested we focus on. So for application number 20, the comprehensive plan GFOU map recommended community mixed use, which has a maximum of 6 stories. The Regent Street South Campus, which is the relevant sub-area plan here, recommended a maximum of 8 stories for this site, and it's bounded by, hopefully the context is easy enough, but if it's not, Regent Street, Mills Street is on the west, College Court to the north, and then Brook Street to the east. And DMI requested regional mixed use, And within the comprehensive plan, regional mixed use has a maximum of 12 stories, but DMI specified that they would like to see a maximum of 10 stories for this site. In talking with DMI a little bit further, they said that they have had some interest, but broadly some interest from developers, but that nothing has penciled out quite yet. So no active development proposals for this location. I think staff wanted to also note that College Court is a very, I shouldn't say very, it's a relatively narrow one-way street to the north of this block. So I think that's part of the reason why we had gone with community mixed use over regional mixed use. And this block to the north is mostly made up of two-story attached townhomes. Yeah, is there, I guess I was gonna see if there's anything else that other staff wanted to add before I turn it back over for discussion to the commission. Okay.
Any discussion on item 20? Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. Christy, maybe you can answer this. Why do you think there's a disconnect between the Regent Street plan for number 20 and the comprehensive plan in terms of the maximum number of stories, or is that not really a disconnect?
I would say that it's somewhat subjective, but I think there's probably not a disconnect here with the Regent Street South Campus plan, recommending a maximum of 8 stories. I think staff's opinion was that community mixed use with a max of 6 stories would make more sense here rather than allowing 12 stories. But yeah, it looks like Heather would like to add something.
Sure. Thank you, Kirsty. And yeah, I think there is some gray area within these four ones that we're focusing on here. I just want for the Plan Commission to recall that when you review conditional use proposals, which is frequent, often they are requesting additional height over and above what's permitted in the zoning district. That's when we really lean on the adopted sub-area plan, which in this case is the Regent Street South Campus plan. So in the Regent Street South Campus plan, we find the height limits of 8 stories for number 20 that the Plan Commission would really base your decision on. So if some developer were to come in with a 10-story building, you would review the project and you would really need to consider plan consistency and a host of other factors with that proposed height. But it is possible that the Plan Commission could approve a conditional use, even if it's taller than what the underlying sub-area plan recommends. I think honestly here, whether it's community mixed use or regional mixed use, we still have the issue that the Regent Street South Campus plan as it exists today recommends a maximum height of 8 stories. So really, regardless of what that underlying color is, community mixed use in this color or the darker purple regional mixed use, we're still sort of in the same situation. Through this process, the comprehensive plan interim update, the Plan Commission doesn't have a good mechanism to say, yeah, we'd like for this block to be 10 stories, this to be 12, this to be 14. Instead, this is, as you know, a more general look at the future land use for the city. One opportunity, if the Plan Commission feels strongly that we need to set a signal that higher, taller buildings above 8 stories could be considered. One opportunity that the Plan Commission could do here is to instruct staff to draft a special map note for this area that would fold in, the considerations for additional height over and above the Regent Street South Campus plan. It's a little messy, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, what's really tough with a lot of these is that through the comprehensive plan, we don't absolutely govern the maximum heights, and really it's just kind of a misfit in the process with regard to a lot of Downtown Madison Inc.'s requests and what this process is set out to accomplish.
Thank you. That was super helpful. I'll just say that I appreciate what you're saying about conditional uses to possible to get a couple more floors perhaps, but I guess I could see where for some of these I could see going ahead and leaning more towards the Regent Street South Campus maximums in categories that would allow it to be not a conditional use, to make it a permitted use. I don't know about the RMU. I still have to think about that, but I think trending upwards in those parcel areas that like 20 to the 8 max at the very least is not a bad thing. It's still keeping within the special area plan guidelines and providing a little more height.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mendez?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly, but I know for downtown recently, or within this last year, we were talking through and worked through being able to add additional floors with standard building heights and stuff, but they committed to adding a certain percentage of that. I think it was 50% of that as affordable housing. Does that apply in this area? And if not, you mentioned adding that map note, Heather. Could that be part of that or be part of that consideration? If that makes sense.
It does make sense, and now I feel like I'm diving into the weeds here, but in the downtown, so to the east of this area, not including the Regent Street area, but in the downtown, we have a unique situation where the zoning code, the city's zoning code, establishes maximum heights. And so that's in the zoning code, not just a recommendation in an adopted plan. Everywhere else in the city, with a few exceptions, we don't have an absolute maximum height set in the city's zoning code. And so outside of the downtown, right now, we don't have a strong opportunity to do that. If you want to add 2 more stories and include affordability, we don't have a good opportunity to expand that mechanism yet outside of the city's downtown. So I think, if the plan commission would like to send a signal that, additional height over and above the 8 stories that's currently recommended in the Regent Street South Campus plan is okay to consider here, our best bet might be to add a special map note in this area to the comprehensive plan map.
Okay, thank you.
Alder Field.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Heather, for that very helpful overview about what's actually achievable through this tool and how we're kind of trying to compare building heights which don't quite fit to the process. I am eager to consider higher building heights in this area because, and I just checked right now before I prepared to speak, over the last 5 years, fall enrollment of University of Wisconsin-Madison students is up more than 5,000 students, and they're not the only, and we all know that campus is growing and the student body is significantly bigger than the last time these land uses were considered. So I would be supportive of a note in several of these areas indicating openness for, signaling openness for higher building heights, specifically for student housing and perhaps the mixed uses around these arterials. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. And Heather, not to put you on the spot for exact language, but would that map note perhaps refer to both the Regent Street plan and language about additional height may be appropriate? Like, what do you think that map note would specifically include?
Yeah, I think we would enjoy the time in the next couple weeks to come up with something to draft some good language. But what you just said makes a lot of sense from my perspective, that the map note would reference the current height limits in the 2008 Regent Street South Campus Plan and note that, a few additional stories may be appropriate here through the conditional use process that the Plan Commission would already have. We'll come up with tighter language than that if the Plan Commission kind of gels and comes to consensus around that. We can definitely bring that back in the formal package to be introduced.
Okay, I'm seeing a thumbs up already from Alder Figueroa Cole. Is there interest in pursuing that for our next, when we see this again, a map note? Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. I think I understood what Alderfield was saying. And maybe you can just give a thumbs up if I say this correctly. You're recommending this for all of those parcels along Regent Street and wherever else it was, not just the ones that DMI indicated as kind of their priority areas. Is that correct?
If I could quickly respond. I think so. I guess if that raises a red flag for staff, I think maybe we should talk about that more, but I think that is what I'm suggesting here, that we consider the note to cover most of these applications, if not all of them.
Thanks. I'll just jump in real quick then with a thought. I do worry a little bit about such large changes for this entire area. But I'm also then thinking about what's currently along Regent Street, and there are some, if not landmarked buildings, there are some buildings that are important to some people, I think, from a historical sense. But then I look and see, oh, well, the comprehensive plan already allows for the replacement of those if appropriate. So I don't think that's probably much of a concern. But yeah, I mean, I might be okay with that note applying to a lot more parcels than just the DMI indicated ones. I guess I feel a little bit nervous about it because, DMI does great work, but DMI shouldn't be choosing, I feel like it's a little bit like DMI is choosing our future land use map, and that doesn't really seem appropriate to me. But I don't know, I'm a little bit muddled on this, but I do agree that the priority areas, at the least, that's worth applying to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Govindarajan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. District 8 Alder. So most of this encompasses my area here, north of Regent Street. And I can start off by addressing Commissioner Heck's point over there. Yes, it would be problematic if DMI alone was influencing the entire GFLU map. But this was something that they actually approached the local alders about very early on, and they included me in the process. And honestly, the numbers over here, at least in District 8, was mostly picked by me about what students would like to see in this area. A lot of the buildings in this area are pretty low height buildings. I live on Spring Street, which is in the top left corner over there, and the tallest building there is about 8 blocks, eight floors tall. In that entire area over here, the tallest building is 8 stories tall, which is kind of surprising when you think about student housing, because you'll see a little bit towards the east over here in Johnson Street and stuff like that, where new proposals are going up for 12 stories and they're really expensive, but that's further away from campus than compared to this area right here, which is a block, maybe 2 blocks away from the immediate campus area. Most of you have probably even seen the emails that have been sent to you over the past week from students expressing their engagement, kind of expressing that, hey, we want to see more height in this area. And if the best way to do this is through the map note that was mentioned earlier, then I am all for it. But I would really encourage you all to consider all of the amendments here, because there's not a lot of opposition here. You are getting the community almost like entirely behind increasing the density in this area. And not only that, but you have the neighborhood association behind this, who I don't know if they sent in a statement because they're currently in transition, the Campus Area Neighborhood Association, but their members are behind this. And then you also have the university behind this as well. A lot of the light blue areas over here, they're zoned as campus institutional. And historically speaking, they have been against upzoning here in a way because they want to expand southwards towards Regent Street. But over the past couple of years, you've seen that that isn't the case anymore. Where I believe Amendment 22 is right now, there's construction happening right there. And that's something that they told me that they would have historically probably tried to push back against, but they're not. And in fact, I don't know how, but they did say they're helping some way with that. And there was another proposal brought up towards the Camp Randall area somewhere as well, which they are not, historically they've pushed back against, which they're not doing right now. They would like to see more development because they also understand that housing for students is very necessary right now, and they don't want to stop any of that. So in this area specifically, you have many, if not all of the key stakeholders in support of creating more density and increasing the height limits on buildings. And if we could put in like a minimum height restriction, honestly, I would favor that because I think that's what many students really need when it comes to housing. But I would generally very much encourage you all to discuss this in favor of these amendments and vote in favor, whether it be the map note or just approving these as is. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Bennett.
Yep. I believe Alder Govindarajan said it pretty well. So I just wanted to also echo support of what he said. I echo support of what Alder Field suggested as well. I will just also note two things. One, in addition to having strong stakeholder feedback from residents, from the university, etc., this is something that a working group, the Regent Street group, has been really in support of, which doesn't just include DMI, but also includes the Campus Area Neighborhood Association, etc. Also, okay, please don't take this as me mansplaining something, but it's genuinely something that enthused me in learning of about a week and a half ago. I learned that the reason why we don't see many 8-story developments is because of like the way construction works. Like if you're going to go up after you get above 6 stories, it becomes like impossible to do it unless you do a full concrete building, and concrete doesn't pay for itself until you reach 10 stories. So when I look at this height map and see much of it, the area being zoned for only 10 stories, 8 stories, or less, I think the entire area would be very supportive, in fact, like enthusiastic about seeing 10-story buildings, and going below that seems very arbitrary and regressive and not up with the times and what we need right now in this area. So I want to air my strong support for both the amendment and Alderfield's suggestion.
Thank you, Alder. Can I get some thumbs up from commissioners about moving ahead with reviewing a potential map note at the next meeting when we see this next time. Yes. Okay. All right. We will, and that would cover all of these Regent Street items. Is there any specific one along Regent Street that we should discuss in further detail? If anyone wants to raise a hand, or out. Ben Zellers, looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just was wondering, I think they're just to nail down exactly maybe what the map note should consider that we bring back to you was the general direction to include in the map note the parcels fronting Regent Street. So be, I think, 16 through 22 plus 36, 37. And then I think the triangle at 29 as well within that. Is that kind of the area that the commission is expecting in that map note, or is that too big or too small?
That is my understanding, but commissioners, please raise your hand and express otherwise if you have thoughts on it. Alder Bennett, I'm not sure if you want to speak or if your hand is still raised from previously.
Sorry, it was just still raised.
Okay, thank you. Alder Field.
Thank you. I was thinking those are the ones that I'm most interested in seeing, the ones that front Regent Street. I am still interested in seeing generally higher stories in these 25, 27, 26, 27, and 28 also. You know, and as we've heard from the alders of the district, student districts near here, I think that's, you know, they're clearly pretty interested in us continuing to discuss this too. But, you know, I'm also, you know, where staff have red flags that they want to raise with us, I'd like to keep having that conversation too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mendez.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with all of the ones that Van had mentioned, I think, except for 29. I'm not opposed to it being on there, but I think I'd want to consider that one like separately during those discussions. But I'm all for the ones fronting Regent Street.
Okay. Commissioner Shepherd.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think what we, again, maybe broader than our discussion here, but also need to consider what are the intended and unintended consequences of, again, adding building height. And I'm sure it just can't be as easy as, again, you know, increasing the building size and that sort. Will it create a greater strain on infrastructure, for example? If not, that's fine. We just need to know that. Will it cause, once again, additional strain on public transportation? So my general point here is that I understand the need for additional housing and the allure of going up, but we also need to at some point consider, are there, again, intended and known consequences to this, possibly unknown unintended consequences? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Govindarajan.
Thank you. I can address that last point over here. The consequences of this would essentially be more students would be living in this area. And when it comes to transportation and infrastructure, for example, a lot of students here bike, they walk, they use the public transit. But even when it comes to buses and public transit, they use bus 80, which is run by the university most often. It comes on Dayton Street, which is at the very north of this map over here. And it runs about every 5 minutes, and it takes students pretty frequently all throughout campus. So this is not, if you add more students to this area, you're not going to drastically increase the city's budget in any meaningful way when it comes to infrastructure and budgeting needs, because a lot of the infrastructure is already there. Students are a very transient population where we move around from one building to another pretty frequently, and there's not a lot of amenities that are needed when it comes to this area. So I hope that answers that concern. And then I would also, because I don't believe the amendments 30 to 35, 39 to 40 were included in this. I would really encourage you all to include that in the map note as well, because they also have a lot of residential areas. All of 30, for example, that entire block is full of residential areas. I live in 31. So there are residencies throughout that entire area. The university is thinking about private partnerships for residential areas within those areas. So I would really encourage you, even though it is zoned as campus institutional, to work on that as well and include it, because the university is in favor of increasing the height limits there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to comment to Commissioner Shepherd's comment about unintended or intended. I think an unintended consequence, which may be a benefit, is some of the decisions we've made in the past year or so, previous increase in density in some other neighborhoods close to campus, like by Edgewood and other areas, may push students into this area and not necessarily densify those areas. So that could be a positive. And then I guess since Alder MGR brought this up, for the campus ones, so the SIs, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I do know a lot of these have campus buildings that are actually owned by the Board of Regents and not necessarily privately owned. So I guess the question would be, if we were looking at these areas and somebody wanted to build higher, would that come to us potentially as like conditional use and zoning amendment and stuff like that? So that could happen, or are we kind of stuck with it being SI?
Heather or Kirsty, can you speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to that question. So I think the vast majority of the light blue area, not all of it, but the vast majority of it is covered in the campus master plan, the UW campus master plan. And they're actually preparing to update, probably a multi-year process, but to update their campus master plan. And one of the elements in that master plan is to identify demolitions, redevelopments, building heights and massing and whatnot. And so long as the city, ultimately the Common Council, adopts their campus master plan, anything that fits within the parameters of that actually does not come to the Plan Commission as a conditional use. So it's just, it makes for an easier path forward for those projects once they're included in the campus master plan. And so I guess I would say that my advice would be for the Plan Commission, the city as a whole, to leave it up to the UW in their holdings to really drive the discussion during their campus master planning process.
Thank you, Heather. That's very helpful. Commissioner Heck.
Thanks. I'm going to play devil's advocate, maybe. I think we all recognize the crisis in housing and in student housing in particular, but and I also recognize that many of Plan Commission's actions have put faith in the fact that increasing housing supply in the long run has the potential to at least limit rent increases in the long run, supply and demand type arguments. But this area is chock full of naturally occurring affordable student housing. And, I recognize that, that might be okay to go ahead and ignore that fact. But then I also think about the fact that changing the generalized future land use map is aspirational, and many of these parcels may not change for 20 years or ever, but a fair number of them could, given the severity of the crisis. But I just wanted to recognize that there is a lot of naturally occurring affordable student housing on these parcels. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Alder Govindarajan.
I'm sorry, I did not plan to speak this much. So this map makes it look like a lot of it is zoned as campus institutional, but I think honestly maybe only 60% is actually zoned as campus institutional. I'm just going to use the block 31 for example. The lower half, for example, is not okay. So the top right L shape is zoned as campus institutional, and everything is not. That's the block I currently live on, and the tallest building there is 8 stories. Everything else is no more than 4 stories, and they're mostly townhomes. Only like the top half of 31 is a campus building, and that's how it usually is for most of these as well. The campus does not own the entire block. 30 is entirely residential. Campus does not own a single parcel on there currently. So there is that need to build housing over there. And Commissioner Heck is correct in the sense that just upzoning this and increasing the height limit might not create a new building here within the next couple years right away. But it does send a message to developers who have historically been discouraged from building in this area by the university to say, hey, we can now build here now because the university isn't looking to limit housing in this area because of their expansion plans. Again, there's a reason why so much developers go towards Johnson Street and the east side of downtown rather than building student housing where student housing currently is, or at least where students currently are. And that's because there have been historically some opposition, which isn't there right now. For once, the community is behind more housing. And I really do think that now is the time to do it. It sends that message to developers. And yes, a lot of this area is naturally occurring affordable housing, but a lot of these areas also have really terrible housing, from mold to rats to bats and a whole bunch of other things that if it requires demolition and building new housing, and maybe the city can implement other policies such as using their affordable housing fund and creating and incentivizing affordable housing in this area, then that is something that we can look into, but that can't happen unless we're able to create new housing in this and more housing in this area as well. That will be the last of it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I'll just add in that I'm very supportive of additional housing density here. However, I'm also cognizant of not wanting to turn the interim comp plan update into a Regent Street planning process. So I am certainly supportive of additional height along Regent Street to heights that are more realistic, as Alder Bennett pointed out, and are already in areas that we have planned for higher density. And perhaps there is an option that we could explore, 2 map note options for the future. One just covering that area and a potential additional map note for some of the brown parcels, if we are comfortable exploring additional density in those areas. That's just one option. I see 1 thumbs up to that. Okay, a few thumbs up. So suffice to say that this will stay on our list for future consideration. Staff, do you need any further guidance, or is there anything else we can add at this time that you would need to move forward for Regent Street in particular?
I think this was really helpful. I think we'll probably go back and watch the recording and be inspired and come up with some options to bring back to you at a future date.
Thank you. Thank you for muddling through that to bring us some language in the future. Okay. Moving on from Regent Street. I'm having a hard time hearing Kirsty. Is anyone else having that? Okay.
Yeah. Just hearing every couple words, every few words.
Your headset may be not working.
No, now audio's totally gone.
No audio.
Kirsty, if you are heading over to the Marquette neighborhood one, number 48, I could try to take that one. Okay, so here we are just on the isthmus on the near east side. If you think about MG&E and the smokestacks, you can see that gray colored parcel right where the cursor is. That's the MG&E main facility. This stretch of pink is currently planned for employment. And the rationale for that over the years and even decades, I think, is to maintain an employment and even industrial friendly kind of buffer around the MG&E facility and along East Washington Avenue, really to separate some of the existing and longstanding industrial uses from the mixed use and residential planned and happening right around it. And so we've seen a lot of investment, obviously, in the Capitol East District over the past decade. And gradually along East Washington Avenue, parcels have been reconsidered and changed from employment to regional mixed use. And so, Kirsty, if you can hover your cursor right on the two purple parcels there. Yeah, this is the 800 and 900 blocks of East Washington Avenue, where changes have been made in recent years to change the future land use from employment to regional mixed use. I think that through this comprehensive plan interim update process, staff felt reticent to go ahead and make that large leap without engaging institutional partners, especially MG&E, but other employers in the area, as they may be wishing to stay and continue existing uses in this area. I think it's a really great suggestion, and we were excited to see that come up from the Marquette Neighborhood Association, but think it really warrants more time and a more comprehensive look through one of the area plans, and that would be the Near East area plan. It's out several years still, but again, we didn't feel comfortable at this time supporting that dramatic of a change, since we have been actually trying to hold on to employment and industrial opportunities in this part of the isthmus as things redevelop and grow up around it. Anything
Thank you,
to add
Heather.
to that, Kirsty and Brian? Okay.
That's really helpful. This is one that I had identified for further discussion, just wanting to understand it. I'm not sure. I'd like to consider in the future for maybe not industrial uses, considering some of the things we have come up around it. But I do think it makes sense, given these longstanding businesses, that they should be much, more engaged in the process than for an interim update. So I'm comfortable leaving this as is and appreciate the additional context. Any other commissioners have an opinion on that? Otherwise, no. Okay. We will proceed and not move that one forward.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
I switched my headphones. So yeah, that would conclude the GFLU map amendments that were proposed by the public. Unless there are others that we should talk about, we would move on to considering the other text changes to the plan.
Any questions or discussion by commissioners before we move to text changes? Okay. Go ahead to that.
So with the materials that the Plan Commission received, we included a list that summarizes all of the changes to the plan. And then there's also a link to an interactive markup of the plan
I should have opened that in a second window, but if you were able to take the time to view that as well, it had links to all of the detailed markups and links to revised maps. But I thought that, and certainly open to changing this idea, but I think that we thought that given, it's 9 p.m. already, for the sake of time, and since we'll be back to review this in the fall, that it might make sense to potentially discuss some of the more substantial changes if anyone would like to discuss them. And those would include updating the map notes, the language changes for the low residential, which would be to address redevelopment of special institutional uses. There's a language change to general commercial that would guide consideration of residential development in general commercial areas. Same thing for employment areas. There's a pretty minor change to the parks and open space description that would allow urban agriculture and community gardens, which is somewhat of a response to the task force on farmland preservation. And then there is detailed text about guidance for redevelopment of special institutional areas, so that those could be redeveloped potentially into, for example, housing, which we talked a little bit about previously. And then there is updated text for the peripheral planning area section of the growth framework that's been updated mostly to reflect newly adopted neighborhood development plans and boundary agreements, and an updated map to go along with that. So I think I'll turn it back over to the commission to let staff know if you would like to discuss any of these in further detail tonight, or how you'd like to cover these items. Thank you, Kirsty. So again, these text revisions will be before us again, but the intention tonight is to raise any concerns or issues, or if you have suggested additions or changes that you'd like to be reviewed before we see this again, please raise that with staff now, or general discussion on any of the text changes would be appropriate as well. Since I'm not seeing any raised hands yet, I'll just open it up to one thing I looked closely at was the additional language regarding special institutional uses, especially places of worship. I know we received a comment on that as well. One thing that stuck out to me was the language talking about, sites may be redeveloped as low medium residential when surrounded by low residential and or parks and open space. Other ways may be considered for medium residential when surrounded by others. And I guess I was curious about the designation that we'd want lower density when there was parks and open space. To me, I'd actually be inclined to have a bit more density when it was next to parks and open space. So I wanted to throw that out for staff to respond to or offer some guidance on that. Ben, is that one that you would? Oh, yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. And that could certainly be edited to, eliminate that portion of that language. But I think the general thought was that there might be some of these places of worship that maybe are surrounded 80-90% by low residential with a little bit of park space beyond, and that it might be appropriate given the context of some of these likely having the vast majority of surrounding space being low residential to not bump it up too much. But I can also certainly see proximity to park space, close proximity to park space potentially being a reason to have a little bit more intensity as well.
Thank you, Ben. Do any other? Commissioner Heck?
Yeah, I would agree that I mean, maybe you can, I mean, you don't want to have a firm threshold of how much park space it takes to be able to have medium residential, but some language that opens up that possibility, I think, when there's you know, more than just a token amount of parks or open space would be a great idea. I think about you know, the development at Oscar Mayer, and there was some concern about tall apartment buildings next to the Hartmeyer area. And in the end, I think it's fantastic. I wish they were even taller, but that kind of opportunity we don't want to let slip by.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Yeah, second that, I mean, going back to the first discussion, when we had this opportunity for green spaces, more people should take advantage or should be privileged to, you know, to enjoy them. So yeah, definitely higher residential would be best.
Thank you, Alder. I'm not sure if other commissioners feel this way, but I would also be open to some additional language with a little more flexibility. Obviously, there's a lot of sites that may meet this definition in different circumstances and different locations and amenities, and some may be appropriate for higher density than medium residential, while others clearly are not. So I'd be open to expanding this language a bit to allow a little more discretion by the Plan Commission when reviewing those opportunities. Commissioner Heck?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to suggest the same thing. And I think some of the materials that were sent to us or we've read elsewhere in public comment, you know, talked about the differing economics of these types of projects, that they really do provide. They can provide the opportunity for a lot of more affordable development if the land is paid for, et cetera. So I think being able to take full advantage of that should be potentially something we want to do at times.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Figueroa Cole?
I have to confess that I haven't had time to review the documentation sent on these specific buildings, but I'm very grateful that you sent it. I promised I'd take a look at it. But did the information included a inventory of how many of these churches we have in the city that can potentially be impacted by these changes?
I can answer that one. The information did not include that sort of detail about how many churches would be impacted in Madison.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if it will be relevant or not, but I think it might be good to have that kind of level of detailed information for an assessment to be made on the language to be used. You know what I mean? Like, and I hate to just be constricted on. We had one of these churches situations a couple of years ago. I don't remember. Like, I'm trying to forget that moment. But we had one of those that it was pretty controversial with a plan that was very, very old. And so yeah, so it is not like we don't have precedence for this, but it would be nice to know, like, what's the balance here that we're talking about and how generic you want to be or flexible, you know, you want to be on this language, if we know how much impact it is. Thank you.
Ben, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, this is something that we're looking at in the current West Area Plan process to kind of specifically remap places of worship that are currently mapped as SI or low residential. And I think in that West area, there are 8 or 9 of those properties that we're remapping. So, you know, obviously that varies throughout the city, but you could potentially multiply that times, you know, 10, 12, 14 or something. So we're probably talking over 100 properties around the city if you look at SI and also some of the special institutional places of worship, or rather some of the places of worship that are mapped as low residential. So it's probably a fairly substantial number of properties.
Thank you, Ben.
there any other discussion on that text or any other text adjustments in the summary from staff that commissioners would like to review at this time? Alder Figueroa Cole, I can't, do you want, is your hand supposed to be raised or no? Okay, just want to make sure. Okay. Any questions of staff or further discussion? If not, we will give general consensus to staff to proceed with these text changes and incorporate some of the adjustments that we discussed for special institutional. Alderfield?
Yeah, just gratitude to staff and Kirsty in particular for working through all of this and through our comments. I know it's a lot of work for you guys. Thank you.
Yes, it was a feat. Staff, do you have what you need? Any questions or further clarification that you would like at this time?
Yeah, I think we have what we need. I'm not thinking of anything else we need further clarification on, but I appreciate all the guidance and discussion.
Great. Thank you all for going through that. I know that was a lot of material to digest. Thank you so much. We will move on in our agenda to business by members. Any business by members? Seeing none, the secretary's report.
Thank you so much. Quickly here, just wanted to note that the recent Common Council actions on North Gammon Road and North Park Street were approved based on the Plan Commission recommendations. And then looking forward to our October 2nd meeting, I'll highlight just two items. First, 139 West Wilson, so next door to a building that you were considering this evening, a demolition request and conditional use for a new 16-story building with 320 residential units. And then I'll add 3100 East Washington Avenue. This is a demolition proposed in a new conditional use for the demolition of a car sales facility for a new 5-story apartment building with 192 units. And then on October 30th, the one item I'll mention is out of the Madison Yards area, the first one on the list here, 4716 Sheboygan Avenue, an amended planned development for the construction of a new hotel building, a 5-story, 145-room hotel. Looking forward to those meetings. And I too want to thank my colleagues, Kirsty, Ben, and Brian for all of the work that they put into the conference plan interim update. Really unprecedented and exciting number of proposals coming in from the public. And I really want to thank all of you as plan commissioners, volunteers that you are. Sifting through that material was not easy at all. And we really appreciate that. I think that this evening was a really helpful continuation of September 7th discussion. Thanks for all the work. And I think it'll help us moving forward into the fall to get these things formalized and back before you again. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Heather. All right, with that, we will move on to adjournment. We have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Alder Field, seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Thank you all. Have a good night.